Welcome back, IB Nation. All of you out there ready for some predictions. That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll. And we're going to kind of put our finishing touches on the Notre Dame Navy game, plus some of the other big matchups. Because, like Ryan, there's 3 weeks left of the college football season. There are a lot of conference battles that have a lot to shake out. I can't think of a single conference battle. The closest thing is the Big 12 to where, yep, that team's going to win the conference. A lot of battles still to be shaken out. A lot of division winners still have to be determined, much less who's going to win the conference championship game. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But, of course, Ryan, the first game that matters to us the most is Notre Dame against Navy. And when you look at this game, what we're not going to do is kind of tell y'all, oh, this is a tough game and Navy's a really good team and a really good win and all that kind of stuff. They're not. They're 3-6. They're not a really good football team. But I actually think that's kind of a good thing for Notre Dame because it's going to be a test for them. Look, we know this team can get up for big games. We know it. Notre Dame is 4-1 against teams that either were or are ranked in the top 25. When it's a big game, this team gets ready. What we're going to learn this weekend, Ryan, is if for the first time all season, in all 3 phases of the game, if Notre Dame can get ready for an opponent that's beneath them, so to speak. Against UNLV, we saw the defense get ready for it, but I didn't love what I saw from the special teams and the offense. And there's been other games where we've seen the offense play better in those type of moments, but the defense didn't. For the most part, they just haven't played good football against teams that they can't – the magnitude of the game doesn't get them going. They're going to have a chance to do that against Navy, Ryan. And if they can, it's going to be another sign that this team is growing and growing and growing, getting closer to the football team that you and I thought they could be coming into the season.
There's already been a little bit of a getting over the hump situation with Notre Dame, kind of beating a Clemson team that had been a stickler to you in the past, a fully healthy team, a team that has full arsenal in their backfield and in their, just in their team in general. And now the next question is, can Notre Dame take advantage of a team that they should beat, and could they come ready and focus to play? We've seen instances in the past of teams that just kind of sleepwalk through these types of games, don't have the killer instinct. And that's the biggest thing for me this game, is that Notre Dame has a chance to show we are a different team than we have been, right? Like last week wasn't a fluke. Those last couple of games are not just admirations. Like this is a start to something, a dominance that you can see on this football team. So I think it's a big opportunity, Brian, to your point, right? Like it's a opportunity to show that you are moving in a different direction and you are going to take care of a team that you should dominate. Like you should dominate. There's no question about it. And this is a big opportunity, obviously, tomorrow for them.
I mean, when you look at this football team for Notre Dame, the thing we've talked about before, Ryan, when we've had to make predictions for games is I have no clue who this football team is. I have no idea which version of this Notre Dame team is going to show up. And I would argue that without question, the last 2 games have been the best back-to-back performances that we've seen from them. I would argue that the 2 best games we've seen Notre Dame play this year are probably Clemson and North Carolina are probably the 2 best that they've played individually. But I think they were much better against Syracuse. They were better against Clemson than they were North Carolina because they played good for 60 minutes. Whereas, North Carolina was kind of I'd say a 45-minute game, right? And then Notre Dame kind of let up a little bit. They didn't let up against Clemson. I thought they played well against BYU, but not great. They didn't play great against Syracuse either, but they played better against Syracuse than they played against BYU. Therefore, the last 2 games are the best we've seen. And that's coming off of a game against UNLV where, UNLV is not that good of a football team, but they did what they needed to do. And they dominated them. And look, UNLV is not worse than Marshall. UNLV is not necessarily that much worse than Stanford, if worse than Stanford. And, of course, we saw UNLV take on Cal, and UNLV went for 60 minutes and battled Cal to the very end of the game. And so they handled their business and played it a way where, even when they were sloppy at times, they still played well enough that they could blow UNLV out. So I think this is an opportunity for us to see growth. And it's not so much about Navy as much as it's about Notre Dame. And can this Notre Dame football team kind of play with the maturity when the moment doesn't call for it? And those are the times you really find out the leadership and the heart of your team is, look, it's easier to get up for a Clemson game. And I think the way that Marcus Freeman and these coaches have run this program is they don't try to tamp down the energy and the emotion of this team the way the previous coach did. So it's a lot easier for them to get up for the big games, which is why you see this team, play with the emotion it did against Ohio State. They didn't execute well, which is why they lost, but they certainly play with fire and passion. And Ohio State was just a better team that day. It's why they were up and dominated North Carolina. It's why they outplayed BYU for much of that game. It's why they dominated Syracuse. It's why they dominated Clemson. This team certainly can get up for big games. Where what has been lacking is, do they have the, say, maturity as a team and the focus and leadership as a team to kind of push themselves to focus on excellence when they're not in a situation where the opponent is as strong. And so I think those are interesting aspects to this game that make it sort of fascinating. And it's about, we said it's not necessarily about Navy. It's about Navy from the standpoint of they're not very good and Notre Dame knows it. There's no pretending it. There are things about them that make you kind of have to lock in a little bit defensively, especially because, you got to really lock in on the triple option. But then also it's about just continued growth as you get into the next two games. These next two opportunities are chances for this football team to really get its mind right, to get its bodies right, to get its focus right, to do all the things that they need to do that teams in the past haven't necessarily been able to do. I mean, we've seen years in the past where Notre Dame has won in November, but they didn't necessarily look great at the end of the season. Last year I thought Notre Dame finished the year pretty strong. Even in November of 2020, it's a little weird because November was still kind of like normally where October would be because of the late start. We saw them in past years where, they just kind of went out and beat bad teams and they just out-talented people. And, I think back to the 2015 season when, they beat Boston College in Wake Forest, but it wasn't pretty. They just out-talented them. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see Notre Dame come out tomorrow and just out-talent Navy, and that's the reason that they win by 3 touchdowns. I want to see a game where you kind of come out and you play with fire because you're excited to be playing together as a football team in a Notre Dame uniform. And that, to me, is the sign of a team that has really turned the corner. It's not even a 28-point win. It's that focus. It's that energy. It's that fire. And if they can do that, then I think this team has a chance to really turn the corner as a football team. We're having some technical difficulties here with Ryan's computer, so we'll get him back on here in a minute. So as we kind of look at predictions for this game, I think when I look at this contest, it's look, our staff is all on the same page. We all predicted a Notre Dame win, but it's to varying degrees, and I think the varying degrees are kind of looking at it from the standpoint of there's still a little bit of uncertainty about who this Notre Dame team is. There's still a little bit of uncertainty of, okay, are they really going to be sharp? Is the offense going to finally get going? We've kind of talked about how they've scored 35 and 41 points the last 2 games, but this is a team averaging 38 points per game in the last 2 games, but the offense has yet to get to 30. And so on its own, meaning without getting the ball at the 2-yard line to set up a score. Cause I'm trying to think of the game against Syracuse. They actually scored 34 offensive points. They had a defensive touchdown, but one of their touchdowns on offense was a 2-yard drive where they blocked the punt. So, I mean, to me, that's an offensive touchdown technically, but it's not. It's not where they put a drive together. Then, of course, last week you had a pick six in that game. You had a blocked punt that was returned for a touchdown, so your offense only scored 21 points. So you really haven't seen the offense step up. And I think as I look through our staff predictions, you see a lot of that. And I'll get to mine too, and Ryan will have his, but I'm going to kind of tell you where the rest of the Notre Dame staff or the Irish Breakdown staff is on that one. Vince D'Addario predicted Notre Dame to win 35-6. Sean Davis predicted Notre Dame to win 34-13. And Sean Stiers predicted a 38-20 win. And then you have Andrew McDonough, who picked a far more convincing win by picking Notre Dame to win 42-10. So we're all on the same page, and it just was about magnitude. And so when you kind of think about which team is going to show up tomorrow. By the way, the game's at noon on ABC. Notre Dame is a 15.5-point favorite. I think everybody, for the most part, agrees that the defense is going to show up. I think what you're seeing in some of those scores is there's still questions about will the Notre Dame offense show up? and be able to get its job done. And that's going to be the interesting thing. And I think this is going to be a very good test for the Notre Dame offense, which we talked about. But I'm going to dive into my prediction first, and I'm going to kind of explain how I see this game playing out. And my prediction is I predict Notre Dame to win 31-6. And I do think that this team is going to be focused. I do think this team is going to come out locked in. The reason I'm only predicting 31-6 is because even locked in, this team still has to show me that it can be a big play offense. And so my prediction of 34-6, I mean, I'm predicting 5 scores from Notre Dame. I don't think they're going to have many more possessions than that based on what we've seen. If Notre Dame comes out and runs the ball the way that they have in recent games, they're going to shorten the clock. And then Navy's looking to shorten the clock. And you have 2 teams looking to kind of reduce the tempo of the game, and that's going to play into a limited possession game. The exception could be is if Notre Dame's defense forces turnovers and a bunch of 3-and-outs. If that happens, then I can see Notre Dame scoring a lot more points because they just have better players. I also don't, because if I thought also that Notre Dame was going to be sort of a big play offense, and you think back to, the 2019 game when Notre Dame beat Navy back in 2019, they didn't have a ton of possessions in that game, but they just scored every time they had the football, but they scored quickly. And so they were able to extend possessions in that game because of that. They scored 52 points in that game, but if you remember, one of their touchdowns was a defensive touchdown. Paul Moala had a 27-yard fumble return. He picked off an option play. But their first drive was a long drive, 11 plays, 75 yards, and then their second drive was 2 plays and 73 yards. They went pretty quick on that second touchdown drive, and you had a 11-yard run by Lawrence Keys, and then a penalty, and then you had a 47-yard touchdown pass to Chase Claypool. I believe that was on a seam throw. Your next drive was 4 plays and 39 yards because you got a short field. The next series was 1 play, lasted 9 seconds. It was a 70-yard touchdown pass from Ian Book to Braden Lindsey. And so you look at that game, and they scored 38 first half points because they had short fields and big plays. And then you kind of, you saw similar things in the second half. You saw a big play. Chase Claypool continued to kind of make plays in that game. I think he ended up with like 3 touchdowns in that game. But you saw a little bit longer drives from Notre Dame in that game, and that's why they didn't score a lot more in the second half. So if I thought that this team could be more of a big play offense, I'd go with more points. So that's just kind of where I'm at. So my 31-6 just comes from limited possessions for both teams that want to run the ball and control the clock. I think Notre Dame will play well. I think Notre Dame will dominate. But unless they can rip off big plays or force a lot of turnovers, then I don't think they're going to score a ton of points. However, that dude doesn't necessarily agree with me.
I do not. And,
can I say this?
Yes.
I hope you're right. As you're getting ready to say everything you're about to say, I hope you're right.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm going to be in the box on Saturday, and I want to know with the team in the box. And the last game I went to, Syracuse scored what they scored against Syracuse? 41? 41-24, I believe, yeah. Right? So I'm banking here, Brian. I'll be very honest, because I know some people are going to look at my score prediction. They're going to say, you predicted a big score against Marshall, and you're correct. You're correct. I predicted that one very incorrectly, as did most people in the general college football landscape, right? But I think that for me, what gives me confidence going into this football game is, one, Notre Dame the last 2 games, I think, has really showed me that they can stack performances in a row, where I become now more confident that this team is really turning that corner and taking that next step. I mean, the last 2 weeks, you beat a good Syracuse team, 41-24. You beat a very good Clemson team, 35-14. And I do believe that this team is going to take care of business against a inferior opponent this weekend. So I picked 52-7. And I know that sounds like a crazy number. I get it. And I understand why people are probably even shaking their head or rolling their eyes or whatever they're choosing to do over that score prediction. It's just, there's just something about Notre Dame now, the last couple games, that has me confident that this team is moving to that next step, that they are going to be able to go against a team that's inferior and just dominate this football game from start to finish. I do think that they could score a couple turnovers, because I think that for me, you look at Navy, and a triple option team is usually a very efficient offense that doesn't turn the ball over a ton. Well, they've turned the ball over 13 times this year, so they have a propensity to turn the ball over a little bit. So I think Notre Dame can steal a couple in that regard. I think that Navy is going to try to, load up against the run. I think Notre Dame is still going to have some success running the football, but I really do think that the passing game is just going to have a step up in this football game. So Notre Dame in the blowout. I have them here 52-7, a big score, but again, hope I'm right. Hope I'm right on this one.
Well, Ryan, I mean, your prediction is not far off from what Notre Dame's done in a lot of years of the series. And it's more about this unique nature of this year's offense. I mean, if you go back to 2010, Notre Dame lost to Navy. After that year of a 35-17 loss, they scored 56, 50, 38, 49, 41, 27 in a loss, 24, 44, 52, 34. So you're 52-7 is very much in line, especially if you think there's going to be turnovers, because as you mentioned, a lot of those Navy teams were not necessarily turnover-prone teams. The 2019 game got out of hand because of that. If you remember correctly, I think Khalid Kareem forced a fumble. There was another fumble they forced early in the game. They had a fourth down stop, and then, of course, Paul Mawala had the fumble, the pick the option pass off, return it for a touchdown. So the offense had big plays in that game. But they also had a touchdown from the defense and then two other drives that were set up by the defense. And that's how you got to 52, because 52 against Navy is an impressive feat when you consider the amount of limited possessions you're going to have. So we've seen that in the past where Notre Dame's been able to create stops, create big plays, and create turnovers, and it's led to a lot of points. My only thing was, and I was talking about this before you got on, is I can't just necessarily, for me, predict, they're going to turn it over a bunch, because this has not been a great turnover defense. They were last week, which was huge, but this hasn't been a great force a bunch of turnovers defense. Now, I'll say this. It's interesting that a team that struggled to turn the ball over so much in the first 7 games of the year has literally accounted for 2 direct touchdowns in the last 2 games off turnovers. And they've been much better at forcing turnovers and putting games away with turnovers. They've put the defense has put the last 2 games away with turnovers. You had the Marist interception off the Howard Cross tip against Syracuse when Notre Dame was going to win, but it's like, okay, if Syracuse can put a drive together here, this could get a little bit hairy down the stretch. And then, they're losing, they're beating Clemson 21-0. But as you and I both know, Clemson scores there early fourth quarter. Notre Dame's offense, they get a stop next thing it could easily be 21-14 with 3 or 4 minutes left, and you never know what could happen then. And the defense puts it away. So they've done that, but it's just, for me, I need to see that they're really a legitimate force to turnover team. If you're correct and they force 2 to 3 turnovers, I think your score is going to be much closer to being accurate than mine. There's no question about it, because I do think this team will put the ball in the end zone if they force turnovers, especially if it's turnovers on short fields, right? Like if they're forcing turnovers at the 25 going in, okay, all right, that's a punt, But that's going to be the key to this game. But the other thing that's going to be important too, Ryan, is I could see them scoring a lot more points without forcing 2, 3, 4 turnovers if they could find a way to generate big plays. That's the unknown for me. Is can this team find ways to get a Braden Lindsey open on a deep route? I mean, look, Braden Lindsey scored a 70-yard touchdown pass, ran right by a Navy defense that was from a top 25 team, but I'm supposed to believe he's not good enough to do 2-3 years later to do that against a Navy team that's 3-6, right? That's what I'm supposed to believe. Because it's a Braden Lindsey problem apparently. So if they can find that, then sure. And that's what we talked about in the keys to victory yesterday. We need to see that, but in my prediction, I'm just not predicting it till we see it, but I sure hope we do. I really hope that we do.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, Brian. I mean, I think there's going to be opportunities for big plays, to your point, right? Like, I mean, it's going to be tough for Navy just to handle the speed that Notre Dame has at wide receiver. And I think that a interesting conversation, and, I know it's not like super groundbreaking, is that Notre Dame should be able to get a lot of time for Drew Pine in the pocket against this defense. I mean, Jacob Bursich, I know, is a decent little player as a defensive end, but they don't really have one-on-one winners as pass rushers. Like, that's not really what they have in their arsenal. So I think they'll be able to create some time to throw the football. I think they'll get some guys open. At that point, it's just about, can you capitalize, right? Like, we haven't seen them capitalize a ton this year, but I guess I'm just banking on a couple of those big plays and Notre Dame gets rolling a little bit. But I really hope that either way, I would be happy with either one of our outcomes, because for me, it's you put a stamp on a team that you should have dominated, and you did, right? So like at the end of the day, as long as Notre Dame dominates this football game and it's never a doubt and they don't take their foot off the gas, I'll be happy. The final score is just arbitrary at that point for me. I expect Notre Dame to win convincingly. It's more about how they get to the final score than what the actual final score is for me.
That's where I'm at. I mean, my 31-6, Ryan, I'm not upset by. I'm not. I mean, look, would I like more? I mean, would I like 38-6, 41-6, 52-3?
Sure.
That kind of thing. Would I like that kind of score? Because you're what, 52-7 was yours, correct?
Correct.
Would I like something like that? Sure, I would love that. But 31-6 is a dominating performance. I mean, it's the second year in a row you've held Navy under 10 points. That's nothing to scoff at. Yep. Where I would be a little concerned is if it's like a 24-3, a 21-10, something like that, where the offense just really struggles to move the football. My prediction comes from, I think Notre Dame's going to run all over Navy, but it's going to be exactly how it's been all year. 15-yard gain, 8-yard gain, 10-yard gain, 12-yard gain, 6-yard gain. Right. So that's going to be 8-9 play drives, and they're going to eat a lot of time off the clock. I mean, I could see this happening, Ryan. I could see I could see Navy starting off with the ball, going on a little 4-minute drive and not getting anything. Notre Dame stops them, forces a punt, turns it over, turnover on downs. Notre Dame gets the ball, their own 35, and turns out a 6-minute drive. And then Navy gets the ball back and puts another 5-minute drive together. Notre Dame gets the ball back, goes down and scores another touchdown on a 10-play drive, and next thing you know, Navy gets the ball back with 2.5 minutes left, and they eat up the clock, and Notre Dame's third possession, they're taking a knee. I mean, I could see that in this game. I mean, it's not inconceivable to see that. And that's partly where the 31-4 comes from. It's for me, Ryan, and I think we're on the same page here. It's more about, I want to see them playing with fire. I want to see them playing focused. I want to see them playing hard. And I want to see them kind of looking at Navy like, you're standing between us and our goals. And that's not okay. And we're gonna punish you for it. And that's what I want to see from this team. Whether it's a 31-6, 52-7, or anything in between, that's what I'm going to care more about than necessarily the final score of the game. And that's where we get to the whole point of you and I are both process-driven people. I could also see a game that's 52-7 that I'm not necessarily as impressed by. The defense does its job, gets a couple of scores, punt block for a touchdown, gives the offense a bunch of short fields. And, like the 44-21 game against UNLV, you and I both came out of the game like, that was ugly. Like, I'm not happy about that game. So it's not so much the score, it's how you got there. And I think you nailed that with that comment is it's how you get there is going to be the big key of this game.
For sure. Yep.
So, Ryan, I think that's going to do it for our predictions here. We have a lot of good predictions here from our people here at Irish Breakdown. Michael Johnson kind of capped things off, 45-10 with Steve Angeli with 1 TD pass. I would love that. I would love to see Steve Angeli get a chance to get in the game and run the offense. And that's a concern I have about Coach Freeman allowing Tommy Rees to do that, and that's been an issue. Brian Kelly didn't let Tommy Rees do that. He didn't let Chip Long do that, unfortunately. Nearly enough in games. So I would like to see that. I would like to see that. It would tell us a lot. We're going to move on to the rest of predictions of the rest of college football this weekend. But before we do, folks, please, when you're in here, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. Make sure you're signing up to the CFB Nation podcast as well. If you're a recruiting junkie, John Garcia is ramping up his recruiting stuff. He had a show this week on CFB Nation talking about it's flip season, all the possible flips. And he's had a lot of time talking about Dante Moore, who's there's a lot of rumblings about he could flip somewhere. It's not going to be Notre Dame. And, of course, Notre Dame's trying to get into flip season, right? They're trying to flip Caleb Smith, who they got to decommit from Texas Tech. They're going to try to flip him. There's an offensive lineman committed to Wisconsin, Chris Tarrick, that they're trying to flip. So Notre Dame's trying to play that game as well. And try to get those guys. We've already seen him do it before this year. Armel Mukam, obviously, they got to commit from Boston College, and I'm feeling like there was another guy, Dylan Edwards, who they got to commit from or flip from Kansas State. What's that? Boubacar Traore from Boston College. Yep, there you go. So they've played the flip game so far, and they're going to try to continue that here down the stretch with some of the players they're trying to finish with. So obviously Caleb Smith's a guy that we've talked a lot about. Christopher Terrick's not a kid we've talked a lot about, but we all know that that's another guy that's committed elsewhere that Notre Dame is trying to flip. So we'll see if they're able to finish with that as well. So definitely check that out, and that's going to be on CFB Nation podcast and the YouTube channel. So make sure you're subscribing to those. And I'll ask one favor. If you are someone who watches YouTube, can you help us out and start watching some of those CFB Nation videos? We are over 1,000 subscribers. You all did a great job getting us over 1,000 in a hurry. But now to get monetized, we need to get the watch hours up. So when we got those videos up, we would greatly appreciate your help watching those for us. Absolutely. So, Ryan, let's move on to the week that is of college football. And it's not as sexy as last weekend. Right. I think we kind of both agree with it, but there's some really good games on this weekend and impactful games. I mean, shake up the college football playoff game, shaking up division race type of games. Who's going to be the upsets? There's always upsets this late in the year, right? I mean, always happens. Who is it? You know, what team that secured this is some team that had a big win last week and is going to kind of sleepwalk this week. Who's it going to be? I hope it's not Notre Dame. I know who I want it to be. So we're going to dive into some of these games. Some of them we're going to spend a little bit more time on others because there's just a lot of very intriguing matchups that we're looking at. And the first one, and we're just going to kind of go chronologically with the noon games and move to the 3:30 games and the night games. There's a couple big games at noon, Ryan, but the one that the one of the two that really I'm going to have my eye on is, and this is more of just, okay, is this team really playoff worthy? And that's Missouri at Tennessee. Now, we saw Tennessee look great for 8 games, and then they got smacked in the mouth last week. It was the first time they really shown some invincibility. Georgia pretty much embarrassed them on a national stage. The reason this game intrigues me is not because I think Missouri can beat Tennessee. I don't think they can. But I want to see how this Tennessee team, who got their first taste of humility last week, how they respond, because their playoff destiny is not only tied into winning out. I think how they win out is going to have a big say depending on how things shake out. If there's a bunch of one-loss conference champs that look great down the stretch and then Tennessee kind of stumbles into the postseason 11-1 against inferior opponents, that's going to say a lot too. So I'm very curious to see how Tennessee rebounds this week.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting one, Brian, because even talking about Missouri for a second, right? We saw Missouri take Georgia down to the wire in a football game, right? So they have been a little bit of a pesky team, still not a very good team, but they've been a team that, just you have to account for, right? Like you can't sleepwalk through that game. And I'm interested to see this one because Tennessee is coming off of a heart-wrenching loss, obviously, right? Where you got dominated by Georgia and they really kind of took you to the woodshed throughout that football game. And Georgia kind of took their foot off the throat and let you make it a little more respectable, but it wasn't, if anybody watched that Tennessee-Georgia game, you know that Georgia was clearly the better football team on that day, like not even close. So Tennessee has a big opportunity to get back on track, to come into this football game and get back to the level that they were playing before the Georgia loss. Like I think that this is a big step for Josh Heupel because coaches are ultimately judged by how they adjust and how they react to the negative, right? And so that's a big negative is obviously you have your first loss of the season. How do you rebound? And I think that Tennessee will rebound in this one. I don't see it as a trap or I don't see it as, Missouri having the Giants numbers this year or anything like that. So I think Tennessee does bounce back, but this is an important game for Tennessee though, because they need to show that they have some resolve, they have some resiliency, and they can get back to that level even after having a slight stumble last week.
Missouri is a weird team, Ryan. You look at their record, 4-5, doesn't impress you, right? And things did not start well for them. They lost to Kansas State 40-12 in the opener. Their wins are over Louisiana Tech, Abilene Christian, a 3-point win over Vanderbilt. And they do have a good 13-point road win over South Carolina. But since that Kansas State loss, they lost by 3 points at Auburn, 4 points to Georgia, a touchdown at Florida, and 4 points against Kentucky. They actually have good talent. Eli Drinkwitz just hasn't been able to figure out a way to maximize that talent. And if you're Tennessee, you've got to make sure this isn't the week he figures it out. And that's going to be a key. Put them away early. I think the good thing for Tennessee is that they are coming back home. I think their crowd is going to be very loud, very
Yes.
loud. So I think they're going to be pretty fired up for that one. The other noon game, there's a couple other noon games, Ryan, but the really big noon game that I think the nation's going to have their eye on, and I know I certainly will, other than after the Notre Dame game's over. This one I'll probably go back and look depending on what the score is. Number 7 LSU heads to Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
This is a fascinating game from two standpoints. It's a noon game. It's at Arkansas. It's on ESPN. You have an Arkansas team that came into the season with a lot of expectations, climbed in the top 10, lost a heartbreaker at Alabama or at Texas against Texas A&M at home, where the final kick kicks off the upright that would have won them the game, kept them in the top 10, got smacked by Alabama the next week. And up to that point in time, they had showed a lot of resolve. Even in the Bama game, they were down big early. They rallied back. And in the last quarter and a half, with the backup quarterback in the game, Bama just steamrolled them. Then they went out the next week and got destroyed by Mississippi State. And I thought they had found their way back, Ryan. They went out and blasted BYU on the road, beat Auburn. I wouldn't say they blasted them, convincingly beat them. And then you think they got it turned around. They go back home the next week and they lose to Liberty at home.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of this Arkansas team. And then you look at LSU. They're coming off 2 huge wins in a row. Obviously, they beat Ole Miss 2 weeks ago, 45-20. And then, of course, the big one was this past weekend when they beat Alabama in overtime. Winners of 3 games in a row at Florida. Also, before that, they played Tennessee the week before that. There's kind of 2 things that if you're LSU, you're worried about here, Ryan. Number one is it happens to every team. You go through so many tough games in a row, you're bound to have that drop-off game.
Yep.
And then number 2 is, will this team be up for, after beating 3 really good opponents in a row, are they going to look at Arkansas, who just lost to Liberty, and have the same level of focus? That's going to be the interesting thing when I look at this LSU-Arkansas matchup. And that's why some people think this is going to be a potential upset. And I'll tell you this last thing, Ryan. Were you surprised by the spread only being 3.5 in this game? I was.
A little bit, yeah.
I really was.
Yeah. Brian, honestly, for the people out there, like, this was almost my upset pick of the week. This was the close one for me, and it really was. Because I thought about it. I really did think deeply about it. I ultimately stayed away from it because I think that this game goes one of 2 ways. And one way is that LSU dominates Arkansas, and they kind of
They see what's in front of them. They know the opportunities in front of them, and they're not going to let anybody stand in their way. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they dominated Ole Miss. You have a big win against Alabama. This is a game, I think, for LSU where if you can put another convincing victory on the table, you're just kind of like, oh, maybe this team has really turned the corner. Maybe this team is a legitimate, like, tough out throughout the remaining of the schedule and into SEC play. Like, maybe this is the game. Maybe this is a better team than we originally anticipated. I mean, that's what's on the table. So I think either they win convincingly or they drop a close one. I think if this game is close, this goes in Arkansas's way, because I agree. I think that you said it perfectly, right? Teams are due for a letdown game when you have 2 emotional victories back to back like this, right? There is a part of me that's like, LSU has to come back to reality a little bit at some point, right? Like, there has to be. And I think if it's a close game, because the one thing about LSU is Jaden Daniels is playing good football at quarterback. He's a nice dual threat kid. He's throwing the ball pretty well. Their running game, though, has been super inconsistent. Like, I mean, I know Josh Williams had an okay game last game against Alabama, but like, he's averaging less than 5 yards a carry, and he's their leading running back rusher on the season. So they haven't been great at running the football. So I think if it's a close kind of, tough outing as far as kind of just punching back and forth,
24-21 kind of game,
Exactly. Yeah. So if it is a really closely contested affair like that, I am deferring to Raheem Sanders at running back for Arkansas and KJ Jefferson's running ability, because I think that they give you a little more diversity with how they're able to run the football. And they're coming off of an embarrassing loss against Liberty. I mean, call it what it is. You just lost to a group of 5 team. So I think that they are going to come in with a lot of energy to try to get this thing back in the right direction. I think LSU, coming off of 2 massive victories in a row, they're either going to come down to reality a little bit and lose a close football game, or they're going to put a stamp on it and say, like, no, we're here, we're legitimate. Mm-hmm. But this would be my upset pick if it was not for a different game that I ended up picking. But those are really the only 2 outcomes I see with this football game.
I think it reminds me a lot of exactly what I told you before the Syracuse game, Ryan. Do you remember when I looked over at you this and we were talking about the Notre Dame Syracuse game, and I said, "Look, I think if it's close, Syracuse wins. If Notre Dame wins, it won't be close." To your point, if LSU's not locked in, not focused, they're a very vulnerable team. I mean, I know they beat Bama, but this is also a team that got destroyed by Tennessee and almost lost to Auburn, and and that's the thing about the SEC this year is you just don't know which team is going to show up from week to week. Even Georgia. I mean, Georgia just destroys Tennessee, blows out Florida, and almost loses to Missouri. I mean, really should have lost to Missouri. I mean, flat out should have lost to Missouri. But they didn't because
Missouri led for 80% of that game,
almost the entire game. Yeah, I mean, it was wild. So it's been a weird year in the SEC, and like the Liberty game, Ryan, it wasn't even close. I mean, I know the final score is 21-19, but they scored with like a minute left and tried to go for two to tie it. And I mean, up until that, it was 21-5 until 7:42 of the fourth quarter. I mean, it was 21-0 at one point in time. The one thing I will say is I do feel like that was the first game where that showed something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they have been, that's been their issue all year. Is they've just been a pretty bad, and they're still not very good. Their pass defense still stinks, but LSU, you hope that this is the game that they can kind of figure some things out. I'll say this: the Arkansas defensive line is going to be the key to this game. If they can put pressure on the quarterback, because the one thing that Arkansas can really do, here's what gives me hope. I'll be honest. I hope Arkansas wins this game. Sure. Here's what gives me hope that they have a shot to win this game. They're tied with Notre Dame for 15th nationally in sacks. And they're tied with Notre Dame for 14th nationally in sacks per game. The one thing this team can do is get after the quarterback a little bit on defense. What's the one vulnerability that LSU has had for most of the year? It's protecting a quarterback. Now, I thought they did a much better job of it last week against Alabama than they had. I didn't think there was any way that they were going to be able to protect the quarterback enough to beat Alabama. Didn't think it was possible, and they did. But when you watch that game, it just kind of felt like that was a little bit more about Alabama than anything. Alabama still had 6 sacks, but they just couldn't get to him in the money downs. You know what I mean? Right. And so that's going to be a key. Can Arkansas get to him on money downs in the ways Alabama couldn't? That's going to be a very interesting part of this game.
And I think for Arkansas's defense, to your point, Brian, I think that Drew Sanders is going to be a big player for them in this game. The starting inside linebacker who leads them. I think he's tied or he leads them in sacks with 6.5. I think Jordan Dominique also has 6.5. But he's playing kind of inside linebacker, but they use him as an interior rusher a ton. They use him off the edge. He's kind
Sanders
of
their leader at 7.5.
Yeah, 7.5. So they use
Dominic
him as a
6.5.
Gotcha. Yep. So Sanders is kind of a variety rusher for them. Like they'll use him all over the place. They'll mush rush him and just let him kind of be quarterback spy. So I think he's a big player in this football game to stop. Because hey, Jaden Daniels, when he's rolling and he's doing the dual threat stuff, he's able to get out inside the pocket. He's a dangerous runner, man. He's a dangerous athlete. So I think Drew Sanders for Arkansas is a key to this football game to trying to slow him down.
Absolutely. A noon game that I'm going to have my eye on, we're not going to talk about, but a noon game. If you're a Michigan fan, you are absolutely hoping that Illinois beats Purdue this weekend at home and that they bounce back from their loss last weekend. And it's a big game for Purdue, who supposedly is the best team in Indiana, according to that one garbage Twitter account this summer. They're coming off back-to-back losses against Wisconsin and Iowa. Offense has been struggling. They need to rally because if they lose this game, they're 5-5. You're going to finish probably at worst 6-6 if you get Northwestern at home. But it's really a disappointing end to. They're going to end if they lose this game. They will end exactly where I thought they'd be, 5-7, 6-6. But they had such a great opportunity to be better and really bounce back with a good season, and they've just missed that opportunity in recent games. Let's move to the 3:30 games, Ryan. The big one, obviously, at 3:30 is going to be number 9 Alabama at number 11 Ole Miss. It's on CBS. Alabama is a 12-point favorite. The Irish Breakdown staff made their picks for this game, Ryan, and everybody picked Ole Miss except for one person. This is an intriguing game. You have Alabama obviously trying to bounce back. This is a chance for Ole Miss to sort of say, hey, look, we have a shot at the SEC West crown. If they went out and LSU drops a game, Ole Miss is the SEC West champs. That's what's in front of them. They're playing for something. They're playing for a chance to win the West. They're playing for a chance to upset Alabama, a team that they've given a couple good games in recent seasons. And Lane Kiffin's first year, they gave him a really tough battle. If you remember that game, it was ended up being 63-48, but it was a close game for a while. Last year was a much more convincing Alabama victory. The Alabama's obviously trying to bounce back and rally and still try to. I mean, the crazy thing is everybody keeps talking about how LSU could be the first 2-loss team in the college football playoff. So could Alabama. If Alabama runs the table and LSU drops a game, Alabama's going to get into the SEC title game. And don't kid yourself that the committee won't put them in if they beat Georgia. Because they'll say, well, they're 2 plays away from being undefeated. And they'll get all that nonsense from the committee, right? So they still have a lot to play for. And all these people talking about, oh, Alabama's out of the college football playoff hope. Yeah, right. You don't know the committee very well if you think Alabama's out. But they could be after this weekend. And that's what makes this a very fascinating game. I think this is the best chance Ole Miss has had at beating Alabama in years. I mean, really, since they actually beat Bama, was it back-to-back years of Bo Wallace, a quarterback. Imagine that. Bo Wallace had back-to-back wins over Alabama. So, Ryan, this is a fascinating game. And the one person that picked Ole Miss to win this game, and I'll explain why after I let you kind of discuss the game, is me. Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, Brian, I look at this football game and it's – early on in the season, I was buying into Ole Miss a little bit, because I liked the running game that they have, obviously, with Quinshon Judkins and Zach Evans. I think they have a couple defensive linemen that are going to play in the NFL, and Cedric Johnson and Jared Ivey. I think there's talent on this team. Jonathan Mingo is a good receiver. Jackson Dart is a talented kid at quarterback. Just for whatever reason, though, man, this team is just so up and down, and I just can't get a great pulse on them. I can't, and Jackson Dart is one of those quarterbacks for me that is like a humongous enigma. There's games where he starts off and I'm just like, all right, this is the Jackson Dart breakout game. Like this is the game where he takes that ascension and then he just comes back to reality. Like if you remember that game against LSU where they ended up getting killed, Jackson Dart started out hot in that game and then he just fizzled second quarter into the second half. And you're just kind of like maddeningly inconsistent with how Jackson Dart plays the game right now. So I think Alabama gets a bounce back game this game because I think ultimately it's going to come down to Bryce Young versus Jackson Dart in a little bit of a higher scoring game. I had a 37-27. I think that score is going to end up not being quite as close as a 10-point spread we'll say, but I think that I think
Ole Miss popping one in late.
Yeah, it'll be like 37-20 late into the game and then they score a late touchdown and it'll make it look a little more respectable. There's just something about this game though that tells me Bryce Young is going to be coming back and he's going to have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. The team's going to really be a little upset, a little bit angry, and I just have a really hard time trusting Jackson Dart. That's just my biggest thing. I think that the kid can be good. I think he's extremely talented, but for whatever reason, he just has not had any form of consistency this year. So give me Alabama 37-27 in the bounce back game after the tough loss to LSU last week.
Here's why I'm picking Ole Miss. I don't think it's going to be Jackson Dart against Bryce Young. That's the thing about this team is that it's not the Jackson Dart show. Alabama goes as Bryce Young goes, and that's a lot to put on that kid, and he's not getting a ton of help. It's a situation where I think this is more about the whole Ole Miss offense giving in my opinion, a sort of reeling Alabama defense some problems. I mean, Alabama's defense has not been great really all season. And my stance on Pete Golding. Now, I will say this. I think the worst thing to happen, I'll say this. Okay, I'm trying to think of how to say this correctly. The LSU game is either going to be a huge opportunity for Ole Miss because this Alabama team, there was a defensive lineman for Alabama, I believe it was a defensive lineman who basically kind of alluded to the fact that the NILs kind of messed this team up. They're not the same team, and they haven't. They have not played like typical Alabama. They have played, they've looked a lot like this year. They've looked a lot like some of Brian Kelly's Notre Dame teams where they're just kind of going through the motions and they're just more talented than everybody they play. And every time they play a team that's on their level talent-wise, they've lost. I mean, think about that. I don't think Texas is on their level. The only two teams that I would say they've played this year that are on their level talent-wise are Tennessee and LSU. And both of those teams are beneath Alabama, but they're close enough at important spots where they can beat them. Well, I think Ole Miss is one of those teams, Ryan, and not as much across the board, but from a specific matchup, I think they're going to be able to run the ball on Alabama. But I think they're going to have the weapons on the perimeter to make enough plays against them. And as you said, they're maddeningly inconsistent. And, I think here's the other weird thing. They've played a lot better on the road at times than they have at home. They have not been a great home team this year. But I feel like Ole Miss is due, because if you remember earlier in the year when we had a couple Ole Miss games, I was the one saying, I'm not in love with this Ole Miss team. And that's why I was the only person to pick LSU to beat Ole Miss when we did that prediction for that game, because I said, I just don't like the matchup. I don't like the way this Ole Miss team is playing. This reason I'm going with Ole Miss this time is because I just look at the matchup of Alabama. They struggle to stop the run. And they've given up over 180 yards 3 times this year. And none of those teams, not Arkansas, not Tennessee, not LSU, none of those teams run the football like Ole Miss does. They are a borderline option team production-wise in the run game this year. And they have talented runners too. Quinshon Judkins is excellent. Zach Evans is excellent. So I think they're going to run the football. I think they're going to take pressure off of Jackson Dart. I think he's going to make a couple plays with his legs that they need. That's another issue that Alabama's had. And I think that Alabama is going to continue to try to put the game completely on Bryce Young's shoulders, and he just does not have the supporting cast he's had in the past. And that's why I'm going with the upset. Now, the other part of this is it could end up being the worst thing that ever happened to Ole Miss, because Alabama, it's sort of like you woke up the sleeping giant.
Yeah.
And that's the fear I had picking Ole Miss in this game, because I'm like, I'm going to pick Ole Miss because all the stats and all the matchups make sense, right? For who Alabama has been up to this point in time in the season, this game makes sense for me to pick Ole Miss. But then there's the flip side of, but what if this is the game that wakes up Alabama? If it is, this game will not be close. If this is the game where Alabama, they rally around for just a game, they'll blow Ole Miss out. I just don't think that's who this team is right now. I could be wrong, and if I am, Alabama will smash them. But I really like Ole Miss in this game. I really do.
I think this is the week that you wake up Ryan Roberts' chances of winning our pick'ems for the year. I think this is the game.
Good luck with that. You got a lot. You got a lot more. You need a lot more than this game, there, buddy.
I'm only 5 back, but man,
only
get a ground back.
Okay. Okay.
5 back.
That's good. That's good. I love the confidence. Another very interesting 3:30 game, Ryan, that's a lot like the noon game. It's Louisville at Clemson. Louisville is red hot. Clemson is who are they after the loss to Notre Dame? That's what we don't know. Are they going to be kind of like what I just said about Bama? Are they sort of like we lost that game, we're not going to be a playoff team, and just, everybody kind of look out for yourself? Or is this the game where they kind of say, okay, you poke the bear, and then you've got Scott Satterfield out there running his mouth during the week? Like, is that really a good idea, dude? Like, you're going to Clemson. You do realize that, right? So that's going to be a fascinating game, Ryan. It's a 7.5-point spread, I believe. It's a 3:30 game on ESPN. It's down to a 6.5-point spread. Clemson is a 6.5-point favorite, according to ESPN. Louisville was on the verge of being done. They were 2-3. They had just lost to Boston College, which is a terrible loss now looking at it. And since then, they have won 4 straight games over Virginia, Pitt, Wake Forest, and James Madison, all by double digits. So they're hot. They're hot. They have a dynamic run-throw quarterback in Malik Cunningham, which can give Clemson some problems. And Clemson obviously is going to look to bounce back from their loss to Notre Dame and maintain control of the Atlantic Division. So, Ryan, how do you see this game playing out? Do you think Clemson? I think Clemson pounds Louisville. I think any chance they had Clemson had at overlooking Louisville was done when Scott Satterfield started running his mouth this week.
That's what I was going to say, is the two main things that you said that I think changes my opinion on this game. Because I think in a vacuum, if you just kind of look at it as Clemson coming off of a embarrassing loss for them, losing to Notre Dame, coming back against a pretty talented Louisville team. There's a couple guys on that defense that are potential NFL players. You mentioned Malik Cunningham or whatever he's going by now.
It's back to Malik.
it's bound back to Malik and Tyler Hudson at wide receiver is a pretty talented football player. The transfer from Central Arkansas, like they have some guys that can give teams issues, and they have had some moments this year where you're just kind of like, okay, they're they have some danger to them as far as being a team. But the minute that Scott Satterfield started talking, I'm just like, well, this game's over, man. Because one, I know I have a good feeling that Dabo is going to have the team laser focused in this game, right? Like he's not one of those guys that's just going to kind of let the season get away from him like some guys would. Like there's some guys that lose that game last week and you just lose your team because they're just like, wow, that was embarrassing. And what are we doing? And what was that game plan? And all those types of things. I have a feeling like Dabo is going to get him playing good football this week at home in that environment. Obviously, has never hurt to Clemson. Being able to run out of run down that hill and do a lot of type of stuff and get pumped up. And so I think they have a comeback game after the loss last week, a bounce back game, I should say. I just think that Louisville had a chance to come into this football game a little bit under the radar and catch Clemson. I think they had that chance, but unfortunately for them, their coach did not let that happen this week.
What are you thinking? It's almost kind of like, crap, I was hoping to be out of this job. I was hoping I was going to get fired. And now we've won 4 in a row, and now I'm not going to get fired. So let me piss off Clemson and hope they beat me so bad that Louisville wants to fire me again. Like, it was dumb. Coming from the adult and supposedly the adult in the room. Come on, dude.
I just don't understand why you're giving a team, the board material as far as like, a reason to get up for this game when you could have caught them off of a letdown. Like they could have been feeling terrible about themselves and like, wow, man, what was that last week? And they're not focused and you could have snuck up on this team. And for whatever reason, you put the attention on yourselves and you're making Clemson, I think, going to come out and play angry in this football game and play with something to prove. It was just not a very good decision. You should have played. You should have stayed.
Dabo's not a guy you want to piss off.
No,
he's not.
Because he's going to get them. He's going to get them refocused. He's going to get refocused.
And Dabo has shown no problem hanging 70 on somebody in their conference. He has shown no problem against that. And right now, I mean, these are one of the two teams that people are, that have a shot to kind of gain on Clemson. I think if you look at the Coastal Division, I think there's only 2 teams in that division, and that I think are teams that I think have a shot to eventually overtake them, I guess is what I'm saying, in that division. Now, of course, ACC, I believe, is getting rid of divisions eventually, right? But you look at the teams in that division for now, or you could look at the whole league. There's really only 4 teams to me that have the foundation to become legitimate contenders to Clemson. Florida State, Miami, Louisville, and North Carolina, to me, are the only ones right now. I don't think Virginia Tech is the program it used to be. More and more people are going into the state of Virginia and taking those players because of Virginia Tech. Like Frank Beamer is the reason Virginia Tech became what it was, but also the reason that they're not that team anymore, because he opened everybody up to like, hey, there's a lot of talent in this state that there's a lot of athletes in this state. So now Bama goes to Virginia to get kids. Notre Dame goes to Virginia to get kids. I mean, 20 years ago, CJ Prosise is playing at Virginia Tech. I mean, that's the reality of it. And so now it's like
Penn State does really well.
Penn State's always recruited Penn State. They were really the only one. Michigan would occasionally come in there, but now everybody's going into Virginia to get the best kids. So you look at it and you say, they're not that team. And you're Louisville. You want your chance to kind of pick up this big win. You really don't want to poke that bear. And Dabo knows that they're a contender, and he knows what dominating them is going to do for his program. And so I've listened to some of the comments made by Clemson players this week. I thought they handled the Notre Dame game with humility. And you didn't hear a lot of excuse making. And my fear would have been if there was hey, we had a rough week of practice. It was cold. It was this, it was that. It's like, no, we got our butts kicked. And, look, I don't know where it came from. We thought we had a good week of practice, blah, 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 blah. And it's all the right. I heard everything I wanted to hear from Clemson players this week. If I'm a Clemson fan saying, are they going to handle this, where they were embarrassed by the loss, but they also recognize that we got our butts kicked. Well, a team that recognizes they got their butts kicked is going to do what they need to do to make sure that never happens again. A team that thinks what they did was fluky is going to be like, it's fluky. It won't happen again. Whatever. We had a good week of practice. We'll do what we need to do. No, they know they got their butts kicked. and they're going to bounce back because I still think this is a program with a lot of pride. And I think Louisville screwed themselves over by running their mouths because what Scott Satterfield said, this is the same team that lost to Marshall and Stanford. You're the same team that got beat by Boston College. You're the same team that lost 31-7 to Syracuse. You're the same team that lost to. I'm trying to find their third loss. Let me get to Louisville's third loss. You're also the same team that lost to Florida State. I hate to break it to you, partner, but Clemson's beat all three of those teams. So you might have wanted to think about that before you started running your mouth. I just think Clemson is going to smash Louisville this weekend. And if they don't, then that means there's big problems. Big problems at Clemson. Big problems. So that's another fascinating game, Ryan. So you and I are same page. This is going to be a rout.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a fascinating game with major bowl game implications that nobody would have predicted before the season. 3:30, ESPN2, Yeoman Stadium in New Orleans, Louisiana. The number 22 UCF Golden Knights play the number 17 Tulane Green Wave. The Wave are a 1-point favorite. My guy Lawrence Keys Jr. is on that football team playing for them, doing some good things for him. This is going to be a really interesting game. Tulane, obviously the winner of this game is in pole position to be a New Year's Six team. There's only two group of 5 teams in the top 25. It's UCF and Tulane. If Tulane wins this game, they are the only thing that could keep them from not being in the New Year's Six game, right, is an utter collapse. They play SMU at home the week after. They play at Cincinnati. They'd have to lose 2 of their final 3 games if they win this game. Obviously, one of those would be the American Conference Championship game would be the second. So if they if they win this game and beat SMU next week and then lose to Cincinnati and then maybe lose the conference, that's about the only thing that could keep them out of it. This is a chance to really position yourself for a program-changing season. UCF has a chance under Gus Malzahn to say, hey, we're going to reestablish ourselves as the best group of 5 team in college football before heading into the Big 12. So I think this is a big game for both teams. I think that if UCF can win, they've got a shot to run the table as well, Ryan. As you kind of, again, I think for UCF, this might even be a bigger game because UCF's got Navy coming up and South Florida coming up. If UCF wins, they're most likely going to be in the New Year's Six Bowl. That would be a huge boost for them and kind of how people view them, recruiting as they get ready to jump into the Big 12 next year. So it's a big game for them. And of course, as we said, it's a big game for Tulane as well.
Tulane is one of the better stories in college football this year. I mean, because if you look at what they were last year, weren't they like 2-10 last year? Like they were a bad football team in 2021. And
they did have a lot of. I did feel they had a lot of competitive losses, though. I mean, you were correct. They weren't good, but they lost by 5 at Oklahoma. They lost by a touchdown to UAB. They lost by 4 points at UCF. They lost in overtime to Tulsa, and they lost by 5 points on the road to Memphis. So you could see the foundation being laid. Obviously, they had Chip Long and Chris Watt last year. They were a young team. So yes, but you are what your record says you are, Ryan. Sure. And we made these same excuses for Nebraska and why we thought Nebraska was going to be good. And guess what? Nebraska kept being bad. Tulane, however, said, "Okay, we're going to use that, and we're going to start winning these games." And huge props to Willie Fritz for that. Huge props. Yes. But please continue to make your point.
I was just going to compliment Willie Fritz like you just did too, because I think that, after a tough season, being able to come back and to do a complete 180 as far as the final results of football games. And Tulane has a lot of nice things going for them. They have a talented quarterback in Michael Pratt. They have some defensive players in Dorian Williams and Jaden Canady who are good football players, man, who are playing really good football this year. I mean, I've been impressed by a lot of what they've done on defense throughout most of the course of this year. So there's a lot of nice tools to work with. Just something about this UCF team in this game. Think of Ryan O'Keefe, a wide receiver, as a slot receiver, for instance. I think he's going to have a big football game where I think that they're just going to score a couple more, or they're going to make a couple more plays offensively than what Tulane is going to do. Tulane strikes me more as a team that is kind of, more on script and let's be efficient as a team offensively. I think UCF has a couple guys that worry me a little bit more about making explosive plays. So I think they create a couple more explosive plays. win a close game. 2017 national champion UCF wins 28-24 over Tulane.
I'm gonna pretend I didn't hear that last comment. I think that you're right about who Tulane is. They're an efficient, play good defense, don't turn the ball over type of team. But I think that's exactly why I think they're going to win this football game, because they are that kind of team. They run the football well. Their passing game is not elite. Michael Pratt's a good player, but he's basically a pragmatist as a quarterback, right? Do no harm, get the ball where it needs to go, make a couple big plays when you need to. He's had a couple big 300-yard games, but he's also had games where it's 125, 158 type of yards. But he does what's needed to be done. When I look at UCF, like I watched them play, Ryan, and teams like Tulane, they've had a hard time with. And they've won some of those games. So they've had a hard time with teams like that. They had a tough time with Cincinnati. They had a really tough time with East Carolina. They had a tough time with Louisville. I think teams that are really can fly around on defense have given UCF some problems. And the reason is I don't love their quarterback situation, to be completely honest with you. I'm not a big John Reese Plumlee guy against a good defense. And so that's kind of where I see it. I think I have Tulane winning 30-27. Our staff actually made predictions for this. I believe, Ryan, we were split 3-3. That'll get published here in a little bit. You picked UCF, Ryan. Sean Stiers picked UCF, and then myself, Vince, Andrew, and Sean Davis all picked Tulane. But everybody picked a close game, and I do think that's what we can pretty much guarantee is it will be a very good football game. Let me ask you this, Ryan. Is there a team you want to win? I know who you made your analysis. You put your analysis hat on. I mean, for me personally, I like Gus Malzahn. I do, but I love the story of Tulane, which is why I'm kind of pulling for Tulane. How often are we going to get to see a chance to see a team like Tulane in the New Year's Six Bowl?
Sure.
So I think that'd be a cool story.
Now, it is a really cool story, and Tulane is definitely a more likable team for me. Like I mentioned, a couple guys in that defense, especially that like I have my eye on as potential NFL guys. Like I think there's more high level players on Tulane compared to UCF in my opinion. I just think that UCF maybe just has a little bit more all around. Like I really like that slot receiver they have, man. The Ryan O'Keefe kid, who's a really talented player. I also have the wide receiver whose name's escaping me. I think his last name's Hudson, that used to play at Auburn, was a pretty decent player for them, who's one of their leading receivers as well. So I think they just have a couple. Kobe Hudson. They just have a couple really good athletes.
Javon Baker too, who transferred from Alabama.
Yeah. Yep. So they got a couple weapons out there, and I just think they're going to make a couple more explosive plays in Tulane. But regardless, I think it should be a really nice, really competitive football game and really entertaining to watch.
Let's go to the 7:00 games, Ryan. This is really where the big games are. I mean, this is the great thing about, we have a question about, do you like early games or late games? And honestly, my answer is when it's a road game, I like games that allow me to watch more college football that day, right? And Notre Dame playing at noon allows us to get our post-game show in and to watch a lot of good college football after the game. So, and you'll be able to get back from the stadium with plenty of time to watch the night games. And there are a lot of them. Here's an interesting game. We won't spend a lot of time on it, but just setting the stage. Georgia heads to Mississippi State. Now, this is a very intriguing game because in every single way you look at this game, this should be a Georgia blowout. But Mississippi State's been a really dangerous team at home this year. They gave Georgia a game 2 years ago, and you worry about the letdown aspects of it because this is still a Georgia team that's still, again, didn't look good against Kent State, didn't look good against Missouri. They've been a little bit like Notre Dame this year, Ryan, much better version of it. But what I mean by that is they have kind of at times played to the level of their competition at times and not really dominated until like Florida. I thought they kind of jumped out early and then just kind of slept walk and let Florida back in. They're like, okay, I guess we got to turn it back on again, and then rolled them. That's why I thought they're going to lose last week. They didn't. They looked great last week. So now I want to kind of see, okay, well, let's see what they do this week. Mississippi State is one of the more schizophrenic teams in college football this year. I mean, they really are. And at home, though, they've been very good. They still have yet to lose a football game at home this year, Ryan. And so that's going to be an interesting game. I think they will lose a home game this week.
Yes.
But I think for at least a while, this game could be a little closer early until Georgia wakes up and is like, okay, you're not going to move the ball another yard and we're going to just run it down your throat. So but I do think at least for a half, this could be an interesting game.
I know that this offense with Mike Leach calling it and Will Rogers being a pretty good, just distributor of the football. I know that they have put up some pretty good numbers and are just the team that kind of stuffs the stat sheet per se, right? I just think that it's a bad matchup for them against Georgia, man. One, they're a one-dimensional football team, which never does well against a team like Georgia that has the defense that they have.
Hold on a second, Ryan.
Yeah.
You're telling me that a team that has run for 97 yards in the last 3 games combined is one-dimensional? No way.
You could say that.
No way.
I know I break a lot of news on this site. I know I
don't believe
I bring a lot of hot takes, but yes, I would call that one-dimensional for sure. Yes. And I would also say this, Brian, how they collect yardage passing wise, I think is not the way to beat this Georgia team. Like they don't have any ability to stretch this defense, right? Like there are a lot of stops, drags, they're underneath stuff. So I think Georgia is just going to kind of settle it off, man, and they are going to come up and they are going to make it a tough time getting anything after the catch in this football game. So I think I just find it hard to believe that Mississippi State's going to create a bunch of explosive plays against the defense. Like I just think Caleb Ringo and Malachi Starks and Chris Smith and that secondary are just going to kind of sit back there, wait for them to declare and just come up, break up passes, stop the runner.
I think they will move it a little bit early, just early. Okay. Like I think they'll have like a series or two where it's like the Tennessee game last year. Remember when Tennessee jumped on Florida early and didn't have like a 10-0 lead or something like that, and then all of a sudden Georgia or something like where they.
I know they scored a touchdown. They scored a touchdown on their first drive, I remember for sure.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, okay, like, this is going to be a game. And then Georgia was like, no, it's not. That's kind of how I could see this playing out. Where it's like, hey, look, we had a couple series. The crowd thinks you have a shot. And then next thing you know, you look up and it's 42-10. Like you're up 10-0. And then the next thing you know, it's 42-10. And you're like, what the heck happened? That's kind of how I see it, right? Where for a little bit, it's a letdown game. It's going into a weird stadium with the cowbells and all that other nonsense. And it's just going to, and I think Georgia's going to kind of sleepwalk through a quarter and then blow them out. I'll say this. If Georgia dominates them the way that you're saying from start to finish, it's going to tell me that this Georgia team is no longer, like we talk about Notre Dame, right? Because like, what are we doing with Georgia? We're doing to Georgia the same thing that we hate that people do to Notre Dame. Or, let me rephrase. I'm doing to Georgia what I hate that people do Notre Dame is I'm still bringing up the Missouri and the Kent State game. But I think Georgia's in a similar situation to what Notre Dame faces this week against Navy in that, okay, they get up for the big games. Can they still get up for the games that aren't that big? If they do, it tells me that this version of Georgia has now finally hit their stride and that they are now back to being the best team in college football. So I do think that's going to be something fascinating about this game, Ryan, as well. Is we're going to learn a lot about who Georgia is mentally and leadership-wise relative to where they were a month and a half ago when they struggled against Missouri and against Kent State. That's going to be fascinating.
It is. I just hope I get to hear some more husband advice from Mike Leach after the game. I don't know if you've noticed that, Brian, but every single game he gives some husband advice. I personally am not I've never been overly entertained by Mike Leach. Yeah. I don't find him very funny. I think he's cheesy. I think he's kind of an idiot. He's got an awkward personality too.
Yeah, he's like that really nerdy dude that like just knows football really well, but he's like really weird. He's socially awkward. He is weird. He's just he's just a weird dude, man. And I'm not a big fan of his, to be completely honest with you. So I'm not a big fan of his, to be honest with you. So he's a national treasure. Oh, okay, hard pass on that one. Here's another really good 7:00 game. There's just so many good night games. Washington at Oregon. This is a big game for both teams in certain ways. Oregon gets a chance to get another win over a ranked opponent. For Washington, I don't think Washington really has a chance to win this game, right? I still don't think they run the ball well enough to be balanced to win this type of game. And we've seen Michael Penix be not quite as good lately, but I'll say this about Washington. They're finally figuring out how to win ugly, which they couldn't do against UCLA and Arizona State. When they're on, they roll people, but when they couldn't win ugly. They've had 3 quality, tough wins in a row, Arizona, Cal, Oregon State. The win over Oregon State showed me something. It showed me they can actually play defense a little bit at times. they're going to have to be at the very best of who they are defensively. And that right there is going to be the biggest area for Kalen DeBoer to improve this program. Offensively, I think Washington can go toe-to-toe with Oregon. The problem is I don't think their defense has any chance at heck at stopping Oregon's offense, which is good. It's not elite.
Really?
It's not like it was under Chip Kelly. It's just you look at Washington, here's what they've done against Power 5 teams this year. 28 points allowed, 22, 40, 45, 39, 21 to Cal, 21 to Oregon State. They've yet to hold a Power 5 team below 21 points. And Oregon's a team that can score. This is not a vintage Chip Kelly or Marcus Mariota Oregon team, but it's still pretty good for this league. And I think that's going to end up doing Washington in because they just don't have they've got some individual players. Braylon Trice is a dude. The sophomore Dean on the other side's a dude. But when you look over all around, the talent level on defense in the secondary and some other spots just isn't good. And they're just not putting it together too, Ryan. Like the talent that they do have, they just don't put it together really effectively. But if what we saw the last 2 weeks is a sign of what's to come for the defense, then I think they have a shot to stay in this game. But it's Oregon State and Cal aren't exactly offensive juggernauts, because a week before that they gave up the 39 to Arizona. So that's to me where I see this one. But I do think Washington is bouncing back really well under Kalen DeBoer. This is a chance for them to really announce their presence with authority. I just don't see it happening this week.
My interesting matchup that I'm looking forward to watching is I feel like Oregon's offensive line has played pretty well this year for the most part. And it's kind of weird, Brian, because like before the season, I was just like, they don't really have a guy that you just like put your finger on and you're like, that guy's a dude, Like I feel like they're just playing pretty good football as a unit. But Washington's best part of Washington's defense, easily, you already mentioned, is they have guys like Braylon Trice, like Jeremiah Martin, like Zion ZTF, however you pronounce his last name. Like they have some defensive ends that are pretty substantial and high producers for them, right? So then versus the Oregon offensive line, I think is going to be an interesting matchup. If I had to pick the football game, I would end up picking Oregon just because I think that Oregon's offense has just been a lot more consistent, to your points. But now the highs of Washington have been pretty nice. There's been some games where you're like, Michael Penix looks like the guy that people tried to make him 2 years ago before he fell off in his last year in Indiana, right? Like he looks like that guy. We know Jalen McMillan's a dude. We know Romeo Odunze is a really good football player. Like there are some guys on Washington from a passing game perspective that you can look at and be like, yeah, they have a lot of explosiveness, but it's just been up and down. Oregon's just been a lot more consistent offensively. Yep. They've been a lot more consistent from an offensive line perspective. So I think that ultimately would win out for me, but I will be watching to see what type of pressure Washington can create on Bo Nix. If they're able to get pressure more than maybe people anticipate, then maybe, you force them into a couple bad mistakes and the game stays a little close and then it could go either way. But if I had to pick in a vacuum right now, I would take Oregon to continue their winning ways in this one.
Did you know that Michael Penix leads the nation in passing yards per game?
I'm not surprised by that. He was off to a crazy start this year. Crazy.
Well, the game against Oregon State, where the most recent game where he had 298 passing yards, was his first game all season under 300 yards passing. So, I mean, if you're a quarterback or a receiver on the West Coast, I don't know how you don't look at Washington right now. You just follow Kalen DeBoer's track record. Look at Fresno without him. You know what I mean? Look at Indiana since he left. I mean, that's one of the things I used to evaluate coaches is like, look, dude, you left and it kind of, that's one of the things that gave me a greater appreciation for Kirby Smart. Because I always thought Kirby Smart was a Nick Saban invention. I did. And then he leaves, and the Alabama defense has never been the same since Kirby Smart left. And now you look at Georgia, and you're like, oh, that looks familiar. Oh, that's what they were at Alabama when he was there. Yeah. And you say, okay, you know what? I have a greater appreciation for Coach Smart now and the job he is building defenses. And that's how I feel about Kalen DeBoer building offenses. Now, let's see, as a head coach, can he build an entire team? That we don't know yet. But, man, he's put together some pretty good offensive football teams. And I do think Oregon's vulnerable defensively, Ryan. I don't think they're a great defense this year. They've had some games here and there, but, I mean, I just said to you that they haven't held that Washington hasn't held a Power 5 team under 20 points. Well, Georgia's only done that once, and that was against Colorado. And a lot of people hold Colorado to 10 or fewer points. They're pretty awful. I just feel like to me, the balance of Oregon's offense is what gives them an advantage. It's hard. It's going to be harder to make Oregon one-dimensional than it is to make Washington one-dimensional. That's really where my concern is in this game. Because if you look at the Oregon offense, and here's their rushing output: 140, 263, 212, 178, 351, 306, 262, 174, 195. That's pretty good. And then you look at Washington's rushing output, and it's just a little different. It's just not the same. I mean, they're only at 126 per game. It's 132, 241 against Portland State. And since the Portland State game, 106, 169, 71, 134, 79, 102, and 100. I just don't think you can go on the road and beat a team like Oregon playing one-dimensional. Because, it's Bo Nix versus Michael Penix, right? The biggest difference in this game, the thing that Oregon has done, and I'm not trying to get into what you think about Bo Nix, right? I think I want to stick to this. The one thing that Oregon has done that Auburn never did is Oregon is not asking Bo Nix to carry the offense. They're saying, you're a piece to this puzzle. Be smart, get the ball where it needs to go, and then go be a playmaker. Where Auburn tried to, five-star recruit, let's build everything around him. And I think Oregon's done a really nice job of saying, hey, we're not going to ask you to be Superman. We're going to ask you to be a very important key to this cog, but you're a piece to the puzzle, not the puzzle that everybody else depends on. And I think is what has allowed Bo Nix to play really good football at this point in time.
So you're saying he's more Ant-Man than Superman, is what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I mean, but seriously though, he is not a guy that you want to have, hey man, we're going to put you in front of this thing and you've got to be the dude. You've got to put this team on your shoulders and win us football games. He's not that. That's unfair to him. That's asking him to do something that he's not. And that's what Auburn tried to do. And it basically is, if Bo didn't play great, Auburn couldn't win. Now, I think Oregon can win without Bo Nix playing well, which is partly why I think he's playing so well, because they don't need him to play well. So he can just kind of go out there and manage a game. And the Stanford game's a perfect example. He goes 16 of 29 for 161 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no picks. Right now, he ran well in that game, ran for 141 yards, but it wasn't a vintage Bo Nix performance when you look at what he's done in every other game: 84.8%, 72.2, 75, 80, 78.6, 77.1, 83.3. Stanford, he goes for 161. Against Arizona, no touchdown passes. But the thing is, guess what they still did against Stanford? They blew him out. If he'd have played like that last year against Auburn, they get killed. When he was at Auburn, they get killed. He had to have the 70% completion, 300-plus yards for them to have a chance. And I think that's something that's really helped Bo, is they're not asking him to be a former 5-star quarterback. They're asking him to be a veteran, smart, get the ball where it needs to go, and when the playmaking opportunities come with your legs, use it. I think that's why he's been successful. And it also helps if you're playing in a league with no good defenses. I think, or very few good defenses. That helps as well, because he didn't look like that against an SEC defense at the beginning of the year against Georgia. So that's going to be a very fascinating game.
And what a job Dan Lanning has done in his first year.
Yes.
I wasn't in love with that hire, and he's done a really good job in his first year.
Yes,
he really has.
Completely proven me wrong, Ryan. You and I were on the same page. Did not like that hire. Didn't make a lot of sense regionally. Was he really running the Georgia defense, or was it Kirby? He's done a great job. And here's the thing, too. They're winning with offense. I mean, he's a defensive coach in there, and he's smart enough to say, hey, look, yes, I want to have a good defense, but that's not who we are right now. We're an offensive football team, and he's playing to that. So I think that's a good one. Here's a game you picked, Ryan. So we do if you're on the message board, we do a upset pick every week. We pick our staff upsets. And the criteria is an unranked team beats a ranked team, or a team that's a 6.5-point underdog or 6-point underdog or more. So technically, if a team is favored on the spread, it can still be an upset because it's an unranked team. And that is where you got one of your upset picks this weekend. And that is a game that's at 7:00 on FS1 down in Texas, Ryan.
Yep. I picked Baylor to beat Kansas State this week, 28-20. Kansas State is another one of those teams, Brian. I keep using the word maddeningly, but they are just maddeningly inconsistent, man. They really are. I mean, there's some weeks where I'm like, okay, I get down with this. They kind of found the best parts of Adrian Martinez in some games. I mean, there was a game where he ran for 150+ this year, and that running game along with Deuce Vaughn, you're just kind of like, okay, that's some good things to build off of, because I think Kansas State does have a good offensive line. I think they do have a good defense. And when the quarterback position is efficient to good, then you're going to win a lot of football games. But then there's other games where, you're leading against TCU and then you start having injuries at the quarterback position. Adrian Martinez gets knocked out early in that game. Will Howard gets injured later in that football game. And now the quarterback position has just kind of been injured and inconsistent. And that's where I think things go in the wayside to Kansas State. For Baylor, I mean, I'm surprised Baylor's sitting here at 6-3 because I thought they were going to take a bigger setback. I thought they would still be a competitive football team, but just lose a couple more games, be closer to 500 than 3 games over 500 right now. And I really love the job Dave Aranda's done. I think defensively, despite losing guys like Terrell Bernard and Jalen Petrie and Kalen Barnes and a lot of NFL talent, they've recovered and they've shown that they maybe were a little more prepared for some of those losses than I originally anticipated. So I think that Baylor's going to win a tough battle here. I think they're going to have a good football game against the Kansas State offense. I think the defense is going to come to play, and Baylor, I think, just makes enough plays to win this football game offensively. So give me Baylor in the upset over Kansas State, 28-20.
I have to say I am incredibly impressed by the job that Dave Aranda has done at Baylor this year. And 6-3 is not great. It's not as good as they were last year, but I don't think people realize how much talent they lost off last year's team. And the fact that the last 2 years of the Matt Rule era, they didn't exactly recruit the same way, especially the last year. And for him to turn a team that was 1-11 in year 1 to, I believe in year 2, they went to the Sugar Bowl, lost a ton of kids to the NFL, had a much deeper draft class than Notre Dame had, for example, because they lost so many guys. And I mean, like legit NFL players too, Ryan, like not like they had like 5 guys taken in round 6 or 7. They had guys taken in, day one. They didn't have a day 1 pick, right? Oh yeah. Wait a minute. No, Tyquan Thornton wasn't a first round pick, was he? He was second or third, right? They had a bunch of kids taken on day 2 and early day 3. And for them to kind of come out this year, bounce back the way they have, really kind of scuffle out of the gate. I mean, they're 3-3 at one point. They got beat by BYU. Their wins were over Albany and Texas State, and in an ugly, a good solid road win over an ugly Iowa State team. Then they lost back-to-back games to Oklahoma State and West Virginia. And what have they done since? Then they've got a stretch of 2 out of their next 3 on the road. So what do? They beat Kansas. They go on the road and blow out Texas Tech, a team that nobody else in the conference has really been able to do that to. I mean, Texas Tech's is losing a bunch of games, but they battle. They blew them out, and then they went on the road last week and beat Oklahoma in Norman. And now they come home, and they've got an incredibly tough stretch going down the stretch. K-State at home, TCU at home, and at Texas. And I'm going to tell you something right now. They are most likely not going to play for the Big 12 title, but Baylor is going to have a big say on who plays for the Big 12 title this year. And I predict they're going to win 2 of their last 3 games, which means they're going to beat 2 of Kansas State, TCU, and Texas. I don't know how they're going to do it, but I just have realized that it's foolish of me to bet against Dave Aranda with the job he's doing. I think all the analysis you said is sort of the specifics of this matchup. I think K-State's playing a team. Here's the thing, Ryan. I'll make it simple. K-State's playing a team that's like them, but better at it right now in Baylor, because they've been taking advantage of teams that don't play very good defense and like to score. They've got a real salty defense. They play physical football. They're playing a Baylor team that's that way too, but more explosive and more athletic at more spots. And they're on the road. So that's why I'm going with Baylor at home. These are 2 very, very well-coached football teams. This is, if you like teams that play good offense, good defense, and are just very well coached top down, watch this game. Because these are 2 of the better head coaches in the Big 12, in my opinion. They don't have the talent other teams had. You give them the roster that Oklahoma has or the roster Texas has, and watch out, because these are 2 darn good football coaches in Chris Kleiman and Dave Aranda.
No doubt.
Other night games to look at, Ryan. Here's a big one that we did a prediction for. Let's just knock out a couple real quick, and then we'll get to the 2 that we're gonna prioritize. Florida State at Syracuse, 8:00 ACC Network. Seminoles are 7.5-point road favorite. Do you see Syracuse being able to bounce back and get off the schneid and upset the Seminoles?
I think this Syracuse team is just a little beat up right now, Brian. I mean, Garrett Schrader's beat up with Garrett Williams out for the year now. I think that's a big vocal leader for their defense, and they've obviously stumbled the last couple games now. And I think that it's just attrition that's kind of catching up to them a little bit. So I don't know if Florida State covers that 7.5, because that's a lot of points, I think, against Syracuse, because I still think Syracuse does have some, they have some good defensive players.
Mm-hmm.
They still have Sean Tucker at running back, who's a good football player. Rondé Gatson, the second, who's a good football player. Like, they have some good players still. So I don't know if I would pick Florida State to cover the 7.5, but I think I would take Florida State to win, just because I just think they're a more healthy team than Syracuse right now.
I got to give props to Mike Norvell, because they started the season off well, had the big one over LSU, went on the road and beat Louisville, blew out BC, dropped the home game to Wake Forest, won a game, just choked a game away against NC State, and then they come home and they lose to Florida State by 6, but it wasn't that close. I mean, we watched the game. It was like, 24-10, and I mean, they were 24-14, 31-14 in the second half. And they scored late to make it a 6-point game. And you're watching like, okay, here's Florida State being Florida State again. They lost 3 in a row, 2 of them at home. It is, and then they bounce back the next week and blow out Georgia Tech. Now, should they have beat Georgia Tech? I'm sure, but the point is not that they beat Georgia Tech. They blew out Georgia Tech. And say what you want about Georgia Tech, they're 4-5. They don't lose bad very often. Like Ole Miss and Clemson beat them early, but that Clemson game was competitive. So was the Georgia Tech UCF game. They lost by 17. They were competitive. They beat Pitt on the road. They beat Duke. They lost to Virginia by a touchdown. This past week, they beat Virginia Tech on the road. Florida State hammered them. I mean, absolutely hammered them. And then they followed up a week later with a 45-3 win over Miami. That wasn't that close. If Mike Norvell wanted to be an a-hole, he could have hung at least 2 more touchdowns on Miami. It was like 31-3 at halftime of that game. I mean, he could have easily hung a couple more on him. Was it 30? Was it 31-3 or 35-3 at halftime? Well, let me look that up, because it was a blowout at halftime. It was 31-3 at halftime.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought it was 31.
Yeah,
man, Miami is bad, by the way.
They're awful.
Bad team right now.
Awful. Like, way worse than they should be. I picked them to win the Coastal. I mean, you look at the talent they had coming back. They had a lot of players coming back. You're supposedly hiring a good football staff, and they've been bad. They've been really bad, embarrassingly bad. I mean, they got blown out at home by Duke. Think about that. But props to Mike Norvell for it. It just shows he's building the right culture there, Ryan. That's the thing for me. He's finally building a culture there, because they were able to kind of have those 3 losses in a row. You and I both know in the last 6-7 years, and every single one of those seasons, that 3-game losing streak would have spiraled.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have spiraled. They might have beat Georgia Tech in an ugly game and then lost to Miami on the road. It would have spiraled. This team bounced back in impressive fashion. And I tell you what, man, you look, if they can get past this game, their last 2 games are Louisiana and Florida at home, both of them at home. If they can go on the road and beat Syracuse, and you're right about that, they're going to finish 9-3. I think they beat Florida. I do. I think they'll beat Florida. And talk about just really, this is exactly what the doctor ordered for Florida State. This is the kind of year Mike Norvell needed to get this program back on track, in my opinion.
Yep.
And you're starting to see them get some more commits. The recruiting is picking up now, too, that they're proving that they can win. I think that's going to be big. It's going to be a big one. Last 2, Ryan. Here we go. Here's the 2 big ones. Number 4, TCU at number 18, Texas. 7:30 ABC. Texas is a 7.5-point favorite over TCU.
Yeah.
What say you, Ryan? I don't want to set too much up, because for me to set it up, I'm going to kind of give away where my prediction was. So I'll let you kind of set this one up and tell me why you made the pick that you made.
So I picked this game before I even saw that spread. I think that spread is still a little wacky. I do, because I think that this is going to be a pretty competitive football game. I do. I mean, and look, I've predicted this a couple times this year, and it hasn't happened. So people can, you can hear what you want to hear on this one. I think that this is the game where TCU slips up. I do. I think that Texas has been another team that has been very Jekyll and Hyde this year. There's been some games where they've looked pretty good. There's been other games where they just have come out flat and not looked like a great football team. But I just think that this is the game where you're going to see those athletes really make the steps that they need to, or make the big plays down the stretch. The Bijan Robinsons of the world, the Xavier Worthies of the world. I know that TCU has a very good offense itself, but I think when you compare Texas's defense to TCU's defense, I like a lot more of what Texas has on that side of the football not a super consistent team, but TCU's defense just does not really speak to me as far as being a team that I can bet on. So I'm going to take Bijan Robinson, Xavier Worthy, and just a couple big plays in this one. Give me Texas 38-34 over TCU. Again, I think the spread's a little out of hands in favor of Texas, but I do think Texas wins this football game. TCU's having a great season. I still don't think this is I don't think this is a deterrent for their success this season. I still think they have a chance to finish well down the stretch. It's just, I think that they are going to drop a football game at some point, and I think it's going to be this week against Texas.
I agree. They will drop a game at some point. I do not think it'll be this week. And it really boils down to this, Ryan. I don't disagree with anything you said about this matchup. I think Texas has better players overall. I think these are two very similar teams. I mean, they're both good running the ball, at times great, at times not. They both have good quarterback play, not great quarterback play, partly for Max Duggan because he's not a great talent, for Texas because the kid's young and still evolving. They have guys can make plays down the field. They both have kind of up and down defenses that look good at times and not other times. I mean, there's a lot to be similar. And in a normal scenario and two pretty evenly matched teams, I'm taking the home team. But the reason I took TCU is real simple. In 2 years, Steve Sarkisian and his team have not shown that they can win these games. And the thing that the people in the media hammer TCU for the most is exactly why I'm picking them to win this game. You can they trailed this game and that game. So Georgia trailed most of the game against Missouri. I mean, Notre Dame had leads in the fourth quarter. Notre Dame outplayed Ohio State longer than had a lead over Ohio State. I would take a 57-minute trailing against Ohio State and winning at the end, then winning a lot of the game and then losing at the end. TCU knows how to win. Sonny Dykes has gotten his team to the point where they know how to win football games. They've been down big and they rally back, and Texas has not shown me the ability to do that yet. And until they do, I can't predict them to win a big game. I will say this, however, this is a huge opportunity for them to do just that. This is a game that could completely change the direction of Texas, because I think you and I will agree on this, Ryan. Texas's talent is not elite by any stretch. They have some very good players, but it's not elite by any stretch. But it's better than 6-3 at this point in time in the season, in my opinion.
Agreed.
They just don't know how to win games. It's just going to be that thing where once it happens, they're going to kind of be like, okay, yeah, I like this. We can do this. And it's going to build their confidence up. They're recruiting at an incredibly high level right now. They're going to get some kids that are going to, flip some kids. They already flipped Colton Vasek from Oklahoma. Anthony Hill is going to be on campus this weekend. Beating a team like TCU could be big for them. It's just, for me, I'm going TCU because that's the team that has shown me they know how to win. And I feel like playing away from home could be the thing that's going to galvanize them a little bit. The thing that makes me not want to go with them, though, is Gary Patterson's on the other sideline for Texas, and I feel like he's going to have a little something to say about this. But at the end of the day, he's not the D coordinator. He and it's just a different deal. But I am going TCU, just for me at this point in time. So that's where I'm taking it, Ryan. I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said. It's that last part. Texas has not shown me they know how to win yet. And then the last game we're going to discuss, Ryan.
We have a couple of different picks, which I like.
We do. We do.
Yes,
we do. We also have a different pick on this one as well, Ryan, I believe. Let me look at your pick. Yes, we do. And this is one where I actually hope that you're correct. Number 15, North Carolina at Wake Forest. Now, Wake Forest is a 4-point favorite. It's 7:30 on ESPN2. How about ESPN2 having some of the better games this weekend? Wake Forest is cruising along, 6-1, scoring a ton of points, and then that third quarter against Louisville has them reeling. I thought they'd bounce back against – you and I both thought they'd bounce back against NC State last week, and they did not. Sam Hartman turned the ball over again multiple times, and it proved very, very costly. Sam Hartman, in a lot of ways, got outplayed by MJ Morris last week.
He did.
And that's why NC State pulled off that win. So, Ryan, do they get back on track now, or is that the beginning of the end of the 2022 Wake Forest Demon Deacons?
Last week on this show, Brian, like you said, I picked Wake Forest to have a bounce-back game against NC State because I thought a fifth-year senior quarterback in Sam Hartman would be able to, to come back and have kind of a bounce back game after what we saw the previous week. And he didn't. So I'm trying to learn from my mistakes here. And I think that this Wake Forest team is just taking a little bit of a nosedive, man. I just think that they've hit a bad stretch of the season. I don't know if they get it turned around just because, again, it's 2 games in a row. So it's starting to turn into a little bit of a trend now. So we'll see. I hope that they play better football because I don't want them to obviously play poorly because I want to see a competitive football game. But I'm going to take the team offensively that is not turning the football over a ton, that is playing at a better quality and more consistency, in my opinion, right now. That's North Carolina. So give me North Carolina 42-31. Every week I watch North Carolina, I feel like Drake May gets better and better. Last week, Josh Downs, 15 catches, 166 yards on 16 targets, one of the best wide receivers in all of college football. That offense is just consistently putting up numbers, and Wake Forest is just offensively has given me a lot to worry about with their turning the football over the last couple weeks and just not playing high-quality football. So give me the better offense. Give me the more consistent offense. Give me North Carolina 42-31.
Ryan, I thought about going with you on this. I've been back and forth on this game all week. I really have. When it comes down to it, it's where it's at. I mean, North Carolina is winning on the road, but they're not a good team on the road. I mean, they're not a pretty team on the road. Barely beat App State on the road, struggled at Georgia State, barely beat a crap Miami team on the road, had to come back late to beat Duke on the road, struggled against a bad Virginia team last week on the road as well. Now, they got W's in all those games, but none of those teams, in my opinion, are as good as Wake Forest. And I think Wake Forest is kind of – their defense is a problem. It's a big problem. Giving up 30 points to NC State is giving up 40 to everybody else. That's not a team that scores a lot of points to a freshman quarterback, and now you got to play Drake May. So I don't disagree with anything you said when I look at this matchup, and that's why for the most of the week I was looking at North Carolina. But I think what got me to go with at the end to go with Wake Forest is just, number one, I don't think North Carolina is quite there yet where they're just a table running team. They're still flawed. They have their own flaws. I feel like you said, I feel like we're going to see this week. I'm doubling down on Sam Hartman, basically, is what I'm saying. And I watched Brendan Armstrong and that Virginia offense, which is pretty terrible, just rip North Carolina up last week. And I'm thinking, man, I think Wake Forest is going to move the ball. I think that Drake May will do his best to rally that team. But the other thing that concerns me too is North Carolina is getting more and more and more one-dimensional the deeper we get into the season. And I think that's a bit problematic. They're putting more and more on Drake May's shoulders. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, in my opinion. Drake May is their leading rusher by almost 150. Yes. I mean, by over 150 yards right now. I think that's problematic. And I just I feel like at some point in time that's going to hit a wall. And you're going to have a team that's going to be able to create enough inconsistency throwing the football that it's going to cost them a game. And I think this is the game where that happens. I think that Dave Clawson's a good football coach. He's going to be able to – because, look, their last 2 losses for Wake Forest were both on the road. They're going back home now, and I think that they're going to kind of rally the troops a little bit and bounce back. I do. They've been a pretty darn good home team this year. So, I mean, they have a win over Liberty at home this year. They, took Clemson overtime at home. They blew out BC and Army at home. They haven't been as good away from home, especially lately. So I'm going with Wake Forest just because I think that Phil Longo is putting way too much on Drake May's shoulders, and they're becoming too one-dimensional. And, that plays into Wake Forest's hands, right? Because Wake Forest is already one-dimensional. They're just kind of that way anyway. They're a pretty one-dimensional team. They don't run the ball like they used to at all. And I feel like this is kind of one of those games where they're going to try to get into a shootout with you. And I think Wake Forest is gonna make enough plays because they're at home and they've got the veteran quarterback. I wouldn't be shocked if North Carolina wins, but I just feel like Wake's going to bounce back and Dave Clawson's going to get these guys going. And I'm very concerned. Like you just saw it last week. There's a couple times Drake May's just starting to get off the ground a little bit slower, just taking a few more hits. And I don't love that because I'm afraid that one of these games down the stretch here in November, he's going to take that one hit or flip up in the air, and it's going to be that one time where now he's out. And if you take Drake May off this football team, they're a completely different squad. That's why I've said this. Drake May flat out right now should be a Heisman finalist right now. You take him off that team, and that 8-1 football team might have a losing record. I mean, I'm serious. He is that important to that football team. And that's why I'm concerned that they keep using him the way that they're using him as a runner. So, but like I said, Ryan, man, I'm not going to argue with you on that one. I've been back and forth on that one all week. I really have. And I took North Carolina for most of the week, but at the end I was like, you know what? I'm going with the vet. I'm going with the home team. I think we're going to get done. So that's going to do it for that portion of the show, Ryan. We do have a couple questions and super chats I do want to get to here before we wrap up. We have a super chat from JP Buellsfeld. Happy Veterans Day to Elmer J. Buellsfeld in heaven, U.S. Army Air Corps, World War II, and Notre Dame #1 fan. I assume that that's your dad, JP, and if it is, or a relative, we certainly appreciate him for his service. My grandfather fought in World War II, and I have such a tremendous amount of respect for those that serve. You know that, buddy. And we appreciate you putting your Elmer's name out there for us all. U.S. Army Air Corps, World War II. Well, that was a different generation, buddy. Let Manager One with a super chat. Thank you very much, sir. Mailbag question. Any intel on how the freshmen who we haven't seen are progressing as we get towards the end of the season? We'll have more at the end of the season. I'm hearing a lot of good things about Nolan Ziegler is really coming along for them this year at linebacker. Hearing some really good things about Josh Burnham and his potential for next year. Tyson Ford's back and healthy now. Aiden Gobaira's starting to add some more weight. So there's a lot of excitement about that group. Offensively, I'm hearing a lot of really good things about Billy Schrauth, Emil Wagner are both doing really well. Ashton Craig, I've heard a lot of really good things about as a freshman on scout team, is doing some really good things. So I think there's a lot of excitement about this freshman class is going to be moving forward. There's no doubt. But we'll have more at the end of the season. It's just not something we ask a lot about during the season. Here's the question, Ryan. Irish in Ohio asks, Brian and Ryan, what time kickoff do you enjoy?
I mean, at home, I'm a nighttime guy. I love, Friday nights or Saturday nights. That's kind of where I feel like you really get that energy flowing throughout a home stadium. Away games, I would rather play early because the flip side of that is if you're away game, the other team is going to feed off the energy more at nights, right? So I'd rather get there, get going early. I don't want to have to sit around all day and just kind of monotonously away from the home stadium, away from the home field, away from the locker room, a place that you're not really comfortable in, a place that you don't really know, and just kind of sit there and think for several hours at a time, right? So I think at home, night games for sure, away games, I want to play as early as possible.
I'm with you. I like away games earlier in the day. I want to get out of my hotel. I want to get breakfast. I want to have our meetings. I want to get in the bus, and I want to head to the stadium. I mean, that's where I'm at. That's what I want to do. And night games, I do like the energy and the buzz. As a fan, it's the same way. Road game, I want to watch the game and then get to watching the other games. Play at noon on the road and play at 7:30 at home. That's what I would do as much as I can. So I do like those. And I'm night games are interesting because as a coach, night games were more frustrating as a coach for me, but as a player, I didn't play in many of them, but I liked the night games more, just because I don't know. I like playing at night. I like how things look at night. I felt like I could focus more. I could see things a little bit clear at night. Like I could just, I could see the players and I could see everything under the lights a little bit better. As a coach, it's just because you want to just go play, but as a player, I loved feeding off the energy and all that kind of stuff. So. Yeah, I liked playing at nights. I did. That's one thing I loved about high school football was playing at nights. There's no doubt.
There's nothing like Friday nights, man.
Nothing
like Friday nights.
That's another one. I think I brought this up last week, Ryan. We're talking about freshmen. I don't know if I said this, but I've heard some really impressive things about Donovan Heinisch as a freshman and what he's doing against the first team's offensive line. Somebody put that in the chat. I think we mentioned that last week, but he's another guy that I've heard some good things about. Next question. We do have a super chat down here from AST12321. Brian, if you were offered a trade that Notre Dame wins 2 titles in the next 10 years, but it does so running the veer the whole time, would you take it? Of course. Yes. I mean, if Notre Dame's going to win the national, the reason I don't like the veer at Notre Dame is I don't think you can recruit to it, and I don't think you can win it. You can win with it. I don't think that you can. If I could look in the future and say, hey, look, if you hire this coach to run the veer and, whatever, and he's going to do this and you're going to win 2 championships, will I take it? Heck yeah, I'd take it. No question. I don't hate the triple option that much.
Call Paul Johnson. If the offensive coordinator position ever opens, give him a call.
He's so grumpy. He'd be such a horrible guy to cover. Beefeater, a.k.a. Toe Jam, 1982. Over-under, 5.5 number of jet sweeps to Braden Lindsey. Definitely under.
Under.
Definitely the under.
If you gave me 1.5, I might still go under.
Yes. Oh, I mean, yeah. Let's go to the next one here, Ryan. We got some predictions that our Big Ten guy, Archer, 452, wants to ask about. Brian and Ryan, Indiana versus Ohio State prediction. I mean, dude, honestly, for that one, it's just like it's the Mr. T thing about what's your prediction? Pain, like in Rocky 3. I mean, that's not going to be close. Indiana's a really bad football team. And I feel bad because I think Tom Allen is, from everything I've heard, I've never met Tom Allen. I don't know Tom Allen personally. But from everything I've ever heard from everybody I know in the coaching business, he's one of the more genuine people that you'll meet. Just a really good dude. Kids love him. They're just bad. I mean, he's just – some guys aren't head coaches, man, and that's okay. But they're pretty terrible. I mean, they lost by 31 to Penn State at home, and Penn State's not that good. So it's going to be ugly.
Brian, even when Indiana hasn't been good, they still have had like a couple players that can get you a little bit excited at times, right? I mean, you think about like Jordan Howard and like Tevin Coleman, and they had some nice players offensively, especially. I mean, even I forget the kid's name, the wide receiver they had a couple years ago. It was like a Ty Freifogel. It was like a good college receiver, right? I had a
really good tight end too. Well,
Peyton
Thomas.
Henderhurst.
They had another kid, Thomas.
Then they had Henderhurst.
There you go.
Yeah. But I had a buddy that does scouting, and he did like a team sheet on Indiana just to look at like, where the talent is and who's the guy worth watching. He came back with nobody from Indiana, man. He's like, that is a bare cupboard right now. Like not good right now.
Yeah, it's not. And again, good dude, real good guy. Mm-hmm. And I hope I'm wrong, but man, and this is a get right game for Ohio State too, in my opinion. Ohio State's had some tough games lately. I mean, you had Iowa's a really good defense. Penn State was a tough game. And then, of course, Northwestern stinks, but it was tough conditions, tough environment. You're going to come home. Weather's supposedly going to be nice, last I checked, and you're playing Indiana. This should be a get-right game for Ohio State. There's no question about it. Yep. It should be anyway. We have a super chat from Tyler Evans. Which coach have you gained more respect for, and which coach have you lost respect for in college football?
I always had respect for Sonny Dykes, but I think Sonny Dykes has really gained even more respect this year. I mentioned Dan Lanning was another guy for me that I'm just like, oh, okay, Dan Lanning's actually a good coach apparently. I mean, I thought he was a good defensive guy for what he was, but there is part of you that looks at that Georgia team last year, Brian. I mean, you said it right, like Kirby's there for one, and then also – a lot of talent to work with.
He had some dudes.
Wasn't the hardest, thing to figure out how to use those guys, right? So, but Dan Lanning's done a really good job. I don't know, guy that I wouldn't say lost respect. I don't know.
While you're thinking about a name, Ryan, the other thing about Dan Lanning too is outside of 2 years as a GA at Arizona State, he's from Missouri. He coached at Pitt, Sam Houston State in Texas, Alabama, Memphis, Georgia. Like, what about him going to Oregon, the Pacific Northwest, seemed like a fit to you? Didn't to me. And that's also adds to the impressiveness of the job he has done, And for people who want to justify Notre Dame's bad start by saying, well, for young first-year head coach was because Dan Lanning did that same thing. But I also agree with you on Sonny Dykes. He's done a tremendous job. I mean, isn't he kind of the leader in the clubhouse right now for Coach of the Year, in your opinion? He is for me.
I mean, it has to be in the short list, right? I mean, Sonny Dykes and Dan Lanning, like
where you are right now. I mean, I mean, and I would say that Dan Lanning. I mean, look, Dan Lanning inherited a pretty good situation. I mean, Oregon went 10-3 last year. I mean, they were a good football team last year, where TCU was not a very good football team last year.
Right.
And then lost several good players coming out. I mean, you're talking about a TCU team that last year went 5-7. Their last 3 games of the year, they beat Kansas at home by 3. Kansas was terrible. They lost
Yep.
63-17 to Oklahoma State and 48-14 to Iowa State. They also lost by 19 to Kansas State, 12 points at home to West Virginia. They lost 52-31 at Oklahoma. They lost at home by 5 to Texas. They lost at home by 8 to SMU last year. And now they're 9-0 and have a shot to be a college football playoff team.
And they lost two of their best players to the transfer portal this year, right? I mean, you can argue that O'Shawn Mathis was one of their most impact defenders, and Zach Evans was maybe the most talented offensive player outside of Quentin Johnston. Like he was, that type of talent. I mean, we just talked about him in the Ole Miss conversation, right? So I think those guys have definitely done a great job. Sonny Dykes has done a tremendous job. Brian, for like the respect one, right? I'll say this. The more and more I hear about Eli Drinkwitz off the field, the more I just don't like the guy. I mean, I'll be completely honest, right? I had high hopes for him because I felt like, especially in that COVID-impacted season, I thought that his team had some fight to it, and I thought that there were a lot of solid things coming out of there. And then just the last 2 years, man, I just continue to hear not great things about him. So, just from a not liking, losing respect for, right? Like at one point, I kind of liked Eli Drinkwitz, and I just do not care for the man anymore at all.
So as far as gained respect for, I think Ryan hit it on Dan Lanning and Sonny Dykes. I don't know if I would say, like you, Ryan, I've gained respect for Sonny Dykes, but wow, okay. He's doing a heck of a job. When I kind of look around college football, I'll tell you a coach that I think that I don't like him as a human being, at least what I knew of him. Maybe he's turned his life around. I don't know that. But the job Hugh Freeze is doing this year at Liberty after losing Malik Willis is tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. I mean, I've gained a great deal because I was like, they're winning at Liberty because they got an NFL quarterback, but they're probably even a better team this year than they were last year. Just as far as being a team. So I've gained a lot of respect for him. I think Chip Kelly's doing a great job, but I wouldn't say I respect him more. I think he's just finally adapted a little bit and kind of bought in. I'm shocked that Josh Heupel has Tennessee playing this well this fast. That's another guy that I've just gained a lot of respect for. I didn't love him at UCF, to be completely honest with you, Ryan. I didn't.
I thought that was a gimmicky hire a little bit, right?
Yeah.
It's like that gimmicky offense. How's that going to work at Tennessee? And he's proven me wrong. He has. He's done well. He's done well.
Yeah. I love the job Jonathan Smith is doing down at Oregon State, but I wouldn't say I've gained more respect for him. I would say he's just solidified what I thought for him that he would be.
Yes. He's
doing a great job there. Coaches that I've lost respect for, and it's more from a football standpoint. For me, I think by the way, Brett Bielema has done a great job at Illinois this year too, by the way. He's done a great job. And Mike Locksley I want to see how Maryland finishes. But Mike Locksley's doing a good job this year with that team. But I need to see how they finish because they got Penn State and Ohio State the next 2 weeks, so we'll see. Here's a couple coaches that Matt Campbell. As a coach, I've lost a lot of respect for him over the last year. Not as a human being, this is about his job as a football coach. He has not impressed me. And they wasted a golden opportunity last year, Ryan. Golden opportunity to really bounce back and do a good job there. And they've just really disappointed. And another coach, probably the biggest one for me that I've lost respect for, Mario Cristobal has done a horrendous job at Miami this year. They're worse this year than they were last year, Ryan. I mean, weren't they? What was their record last year? They were still like a 7-5, and lost a 3-point game to Florida State, lost a 3-point game to North Carolina, lost a 2-point game to Virginia, got blown up by Alabama and Michigan State. But they won 5 of their last 6. They beat a ranked NC State team. They went to Pitt and beat Kenny Pickett and Pitt there. They beat Georgia Tech. They beat Virginia Tech. They ended the season with a 47-10 win at Duke. Right? So, I mean, they fired that guy, right? Understandably so. You come back with a very good team. You got some good transfers. You've got a good quarterback, and you lost to Texas A&M. You got blown out at home by Middle Tennessee. You lost at home to North Carolina. You got blown out at home by Duke. You got blown out at home by Florida State, and you needed 4 overtimes to beat a Virginia team, and you scored 14 freaking points. And they're going to get curb stomped in 2 weeks when they got to go to Clemson. Clemson is going to annihilate them in 2 weeks because they are such an unphysical football team.
Yeah.
They're one of the softest football teams in college football. And that's the thing that's where I've lost respect for Coach Cristobal and the job he's done is the way that his team folded down the stretch last year at Oregon, physically folded and got embarrassed physically by Utah in those 2 losses. And you watch now, you're like, this is interesting. Maybe he's not the coach I thought he is. So he's gonna have to figure things out quick because it's not even that they're losing, Ryan. It's they're getting embarrassed.
Right.
I mean, they're getting flat out. I mean, blowout. They lost at home 45-21 to Duke. Now, look, Mike Elko has done a phenomenal job at Duke this year. Phenomenal job. I mean, honestly, for me, if the season ended today, he's my ACC coach of the year. I mean, flat out, when you talk about how bad that football team was when he took over, and now they're already – think about this. Duke is bowl eligible with 3 games left in the year. This is a team that went 3-9 and lost to Charlotte last year, lost by 31, 4, 48, 38, 25, 31, 40, and 37 points last year. That's the margin of defeat that Duke suffered through last year. And now they're 6-3, and Ryan, they're about 5 plays away from being 9-0. They lost by 8 points, or at least 2 plays away from being 8-1. How about that? Because I think Kansas outplayed them. I thought. Now they had a shot at the end, but Kansas outplayed them. They lost in overtime to Georgia Tech, and they lost by 3 points to North Carolina in a game where Drake May they scored with 16 seconds left. I'm looking at it now. North Carolina threw a touchdown pass with 16 seconds left. That is a tremendous job. And as good of a job as Mac Brown is doing, North Carolina was supposed to be good last year. They disappointed. Mike Elko in year 1 has done a phenomenal job. Here's another coach I've lost respect for, speaking of the ACC. Jeff Hafley has done an awful job at Boston College. They're not recruiting. Their team is a joke. In 3 years, a program that notoriously every single year produced big-time offensive lines has had 2 of the 3 worst offensive lines I've ever seen in the last 3 years. I thought the 2020 offensive line was fast. This one's even worse than that one.
Yeah. Because there's not talent on this one, right? Like at least in 2020, there was talent. It was just some guys were playing out of position. And it was just not well managed. This unit's bad, man. Like there's just not talent on that unit right now.
And you can't chalk it up to losing Mahogany because he doesn't make that big of a difference, in my opinion.
It's one player, and he's a guard.
Right.
It's one player.
Right.
Oh, how about this one? Lesser degree because I didn't have a huge opinion of him. But Jimbo Fisher went from a guy that I thought was overrated coach to he's a problem, man. Like you need to get him out. Like it's not good. It's not good right now. Not at all.
Agree with you. He was always overrated, but I didn't think he was this bad.
Yeah, I didn't think he was a bad coach. I just thought he was overrated, right?
He's mediocre.
Now I'm kind of like,
they're bad.
He's not a good coach. Yeah.
I haven't lost respect for him because this is who I think he is. A coach to me that has come back down to earth is Luke Fickell. He is back to who he is. Now that he's lost all the talent that Marcus Freeman and Mike Mickens helped him get, he is back to being, what Cincinnati is. They're 7-2. They're tough. They're gritty. They've got a couple close wins, a couple close losses. They win ugly, and this is who they are. This is who Cincinnati is without all the elite talent that Marcus Freeman got them there. So people can say some people may disagree with that and all those type of things, but he's back to I haven't lost respect for him because I respect Luke Fickell. I do. But this is why I didn't want him at Notre Dame. He's just a good football coach. That's it. Good football coach. And this year he's shown it. Good football coach, not dynamic. And the guy that was running his offense last year, everybody thought LSU's offense was going to be garbage this year. And Mike Denbrock's got him playing good football, right? I mean, that's an assistant coach that's not getting enough love right now is Mike Denbrock. Because, Ryan, that offense was a mess. You didn't know who your quarterback was going to be. Your offensive line's a problem. Keyshawn Boutte doesn't want to be there. You don't have the receiver talent you used to have. Your running back talent's okay.
Do you remember when we thought Boutte was going to quit? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Like, that was crazy, man. That wasn't that long ago.
Yeah. Coach Denbrock's done and look, props to Brian Kelly for getting that team from not folding. But Mike Denbrock deserves a lot of credit for the job he's done with that football team. There's no question about it. He's doing a nice job. So that's my those are my coaches that I've lost respect for, Ryan, at this point in time. Got a super chat from Benjamin Weiss. Thank you, Benjamin. Thanks for bringing back football 101 yesterday. Missed it. Well, it was fun. It was fun to do that triple option breakdown. It was a lot more fun than I thought, and I thought Jesse did a great job. Real quick question here, Ryan, or comment. Archer's in a conversation on the board. He says, Salty, I'm fine with being accused as a homer, but Brian Hartline is the best position coach in the country, period. I'm going to put a comma at the end of your period and say, except for Harry Heastand, and you have a good day, sir. So it ain't rocket science. Is Jaden Lamar having second thoughts? Brian, I've heard some pretty convincing rumors involving him flipping elsewhere, which would make sense considering the wealth of offensive weapons already incoming. This is not the forum for us to discuss that. We put something on the board a couple weeks ago, Ryan, and if you remember my comments about Jaden Lamar, I'm not going to say anything other than I'm not going to push back against the rumors, and I'll just leave it at that. But we put an update on the board a couple weeks ago, and so members of the Irish Breakdown community are not surprised by the growing rumors that Jaden may be looking elsewhere. So we'll see. Brandon Plesner with a question says, why would Dante be looking elsewhere when Kenny Dillingham has turned Bo Nix into a productive talent as well as turning his career completely around? It's far away. I really think that's it. I think Dante's a Midwest kid. Look, he's not having a very good senior year, Ryan. I don't know if you've seen his film or his stats, but he's not having a good year. And I truly believe in my heart of hearts that Dante has just not gotten over the fact that he didn't get to a school where he wanted to go. I do. I think I know for a fact that he was heartbroken when he couldn't go to Notre Dame anymore because it wasn't really his choice. He was part Notre Dame, part his dad. Now, it was his choice from the standpoint of he needed to put his foot down and say, Dad, I'm going where I want to go. And that's on Dante, right? And I feel for him because of that. But he wasn't willing to do that, and that's why he's not going to the school he wants to go to. And instead of getting a Notre Dame degree, he's going to have a chance to get like a degree from like Michigan State or Oregon. But I just don't think he wants to be close to home. I think that there's some folks around him that have their hand out. I don't think that matters a whole lot to Dante, to be complete. I've never heard anything about Dante being a kid that wants the money. I mean, like most 17, 18-year-olds, if someone's going to offer it, yeah, sure. But it's not what the driving force was. Dante never asked Notre Dame for money. That was never a reason he wasn't willing to commit to Notre Dame. He wanted to be there. People around him led him down a different path, and he allowed himself to be led down that path. That's on him. That part's on him. But I like Dante. I think he's a good kid, and I just think that he was never – I think he liked Oregon a lot, but now it's getting close to like putting that name on the dotted line. You start thinking about the fact that you're going to freaking move to the Pacific Northwest when you're a Detroit kid. I just don't think he's comfortable with that, Ryan. And this is just 100% my opinion. Just my opinion of what I know about Dante and his situation. It's my opinion. I just don't think he wanted to go that far away from home.
Yeah.
All right.
And the whole Oregon thing popped up real quick too, Brian. And then all of a sudden he's in the Oregon class. Like that was like because it was like, remember the Miami thing popped up at one point. They're talking about Michigan State. Like there's some other schools that have kind of were circulating in that whole conversation. And then all of a sudden it's Oregon. Like where the heck did Oregon come from? Right. So I feel bad for Dante, man. I really do. I feel bad for the kid because I know at some point, like you can kind of put your foot down and make your own decision. But if you don't have the support around you to guide you in the right direction, you're in a bad situation to begin with. Right. So I hope everything works out for him, but I do think that it is affecting him subconsciously right now.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's see here. Why not Michigan then? Because Michigan's not offering money. I mean, that's the reality. Michigan's a lot like Notre Dame. Michigan's not offering kids money to entice them. Michigan's doing especially their basketball team. Like the money they were able to get Hunter Dickinson as a student athlete is partly why he turned down the NBA or playing overseas last year. And he was very open about that. So they're like Notre Dame. They're doing right by their current players. They're just not using it as an enticement to get kids to come there. And, that's just that's the reality of it. Because again, he's still being led by people around him, and from what I'm told, Michigan State is basically throwing the kitchen sink at Dante to try to put a package together to get him to go there, and that's what the people around him care about. So, and the quarterback they got a commitment from is just not good. I mean, Ryan, you and I have both saw Bo Edmondson. He's not a very good quarterback in my opinion. He is If I was a Mountain West team, I wouldn't be fired up about getting Bo Edmondson. I'm serious. I'm
He's a
serious.
Mac. He's like a Mac quarterback to me.
An okay Mac quarterback. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not a fan, to be honest with you. I'm really not a
Mhm.
fan. So, yeah, we'll see how that one plays out. But that's why, Brandon. So here's the last one. We're going to get to it from Irish and Ohio, and then we're going to wrap this sucker up. Irish and Ohio asked Brian and Ryan, why do you think national media hates on the ACC and Clemson, but not the weakness of the Big Ten? Mid-low part of the Big Ten is terrible. You want to take a crack at that, Ryan? Because I have some strong opinions on this.
I mean, I would love to hear your opinions on it, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. I mean, I think it's mostly just that there's a couple better teams up top than what the ACC has to offer right now. You know, Clemson isn't quite as good as they typically have been. And then outside of that, I mean, you're looking at, North Carolina is a pretty good football team, but I mean, Ohio State's a very good football team. Obviously, Michigan is a good football team. Like, there's a couple better teams up top, which I think kind of makes up in some people's eyes as far as the depth of the conference. But I don't disagree with the question here, because I do think that you mean if you're going to push so hard against the ACC being a bad conference throughout, you should also do the same to the Big Ten after the huge drop off from Ohio State and Michigan to the
And
West.
that's been true for years in the Big Ten,
Yeah.
Ryan. And it's even worse now because there's not at least the two decent West teams in Wisconsin and Iowa that there used to be. The Big Ten sucks after the first two teams. I mean, seriously. There's a few reasons. So I'm going to address the ACC first and the Big Ten first. Reason number one, Ryan, it's lazy. Because for about 5 years, all the stuff they're saying about the ACC now was true. The ACC sucked coming into this year. It did. They started to get better last year. I think the ACC has made some very good hires in recent seasons that have improved. Mac Brown's done a really nice job improving North Carolina. Mike Elko's clearly done a great job there. So you've had Dave Clawson's a very good football coach at Wake Forest, who's built that program up. It's laziness. It's just, well, this is the way. It's because they do the same thing with the SEC. They hyped the SEC up this year like it's some great league, and I'm like, it's not that good of a league. I mean, look what they did out of conference. Take away Georgia and a really good win by Florida, and what has the SEC done this year? Right? I mean, not overly impressive. LSU loses to Florida State, maybe the fifth or sixth best team, and the team that's favored to win the SEC West lost basically in their own backyard to a team that's no chance at winning the Atlantic Division in the ACC. Think about that. Right? I mean, it's been that way all year. I mean, Alabama goes on the road and barely beats the third or fourth best team in the Big 12, who starting quarterback got knocked out when they were winning, when Texas was winning. So I think a lot of it's just laziness. It's spin from past years instead of doing real analysis and looking at data and making those arguments. Just lazy. It's just lazy arguments. And so I think that's a big part of it. I think also the do you want to badmouth a conference that you want to be a part of? I think that some people at ESPN especially badmouth the ACC because they're still trying to diminish the ACC so they can eventually get out of that ACC contract. I think they want to get out of the ACC contract. I think it's a big part of it too. I just don't think that's the number one priority. Clemson's a different animal because Clemson has never gotten respect from the national media, ever, in my opinion. And I think a big part of it is Dabo. I don't think they like Dabo. He's a very outspoken person about his faith. He's very outspoken against the pet causes that the media take on, paying players, things like that. He's been very against that. He's spoken out against that. He has voiced legitimate concerns about those things that we now see coming true. Saban has as well, but they're afraid of Nick Saban. They're not afraid of Dabo. Plus, Nick Saban is the guy in the conference that pays all their salaries. You take the SEC away from ESPN, it folds. There's no more ESPN. They can't survive without the SEC. So they're afraid of Nick Saban. They're not afraid of Dabo because Dabo is very outspoken about his faith. And I think there's a lot of people that don't like that. It's shut up and keep your Christianity to yourself, which is nonsense and is the exact opposite of what a Christian is called to do by their person that founded their faith and by the very foundations of what they believe in. So, you don't put your light under your bed, right? I mean, that's silly. You're supposed to put it where people can see it shine. And so I think that's a part of it. And Dabo shook up the echo chamber, right, Ryan? Clemson's not supposed to be beating Ohio State all the time. What is this nonsense? Wait a minute. Why are you guys beating Alabama? This isn't right. You're not supposed to do this. So I think there's a lot of that as well. And so I think that all those different things factor into why Clemson has never gotten the love that they should, in my opinion. And they've been waiting on an opportunity for them to get beat and for them to fall off so they can then start hammering Dabo. And then some of the criticism this year is legitimate. I don't think Dabo did a good job putting his staff together. I don't like the hires he made. But, I look at Dabo and I see a lot of people that, that just I just think I think those are the reasons for it as far as Dabo specifically. I don't think that's why they hate on the ACC. I think that's unique to Dabo. And they don't like the fact that Clemson is out there beating their pet projects, their babies, Alabama and Ohio State and teams like that. Like this team from the ACC is not supposed to be doing this to our SEC babies. We're trying to get out of this ACC contract. If Clemson wasn't Clemson, it'd be a whole lot easier for ESPN to get out of the ACC contract. Whole lot easier. And Dabo's making it harder on them. And I don't think they like that. So it's another reason I root for Clemson, to be honest with you, outside of Notre Dame. I don't want to beat Notre Dame, but I like it when they go shake up that whole thing. I mean, think about it. Yeah. So anyway, but the original thing is, I think a lot of it's just laziness. Just look, let's be real about this, especially when it comes to TV. There's a lot of people on TV that have no business giving opinions, being paid for opinions. It's bad. I listen to Greg McElroy and Robert Griffin III do color for football games, and I'm like, these guys are awful calling games.
It's really bad, man.
And,
it's really bad.
Yeah, that's what I kind of think is the deal. So, yeah, that's my thoughts. Any thoughts other than that there, Ryan?
No, I think there's always an SEC bias, and there's a laziness just in general in the media. I mean, I listen to Robert Griffin as well, and I'm just like, why is this a thing right now? Why am I listening to him? Greg McElroy, you can tell, hasn't done the research on the teams that he's announcing for and the commentating on. It's just, it's frustrating, man. It's frustrating.
Yeah. Well, and then it's like Booger McFarland's another one. It's like, why is this guy continuing to talk? You listen to Lee Corso and you're like, what are we doing here? Like, this guy used to be entertaining, but like, it's just, why is he out there?
It's all about your shtick and your persona now. It's not about actual analysis or content. It's just about who's entertaining, I guess. Some people find Booger McFarland entertaining, I guess. I'm not one of them. But
Who?
I think people do, man. They must.
Do they like making fun of like how the dumb things he says? I mean, like there's just so many like former players, and then I see these other former players that do a great job, and they're not getting that push. I've mentioned Jonathan Vilma before. I think he does a great job. Like, and then he doesn't get that push. Like, it's strange. It's very strange.
Archer just said Desmond Howard is awful. I agree.
He's terrible. Not good. He's terrible. Not good at all. Yeah. He's terrible. Yeah. So it's just really strange to see it. Like, of all the former athletes, you're telling me this is the best that you can do, is the guys that we see on ESPN. And that's the thing is it's like you said, it's very lazy analysis, but that's what people pay for. People would rather listen to Shannon Sharp and Skip Bayless yell at each other, or back in the day, Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman yell at each other, and they're both saying a bunch of nothing when, I mean, it's like they're not saying anything. I mean, I'm listening to, some of the, Steve, it's like how Stephen A. Smith is still allowed to talk about things other than basketball. It blows my mind. It's just
it's a saying that some people have to like stick to their shtick, It's like, I heard that Skip Bayless used to be a really informative journalist back in the day.
He was a very good journalist.
And now it's just like, you know what his shtick is, man. Like, he hates certain players, he hates certain teams. Like, that just is what it is,
Yeah.
So,
Yep. So it's frustrating, but people say this is what gets clicks and this is what gets views, and so we're going to do it. And I just I don't like it. I think it's cheapened it, right? It's the same thing. I used to love watching political shows, and because you'd like get real debate, you'd get people on there from different sides actually having debates and discussions. I grew up watching Chris Matthews on Hardball, and I didn't agree with Chris Matthews on a lot of topics, but you'd like get like legitimate debate, and like now it's just like everybody's in their own sides yelling, throwing bombs at the other. And if you don't agree with me, you're a horrible person. And but that's what sells. That's what people apparently want to hear. And it's just like, so I'm like, turn off and it's the same thing with ESPN. I can't listen to lazy analysis. I can't listen. I want to hear people discuss things legitimately, even if you disagree with me. I want to listen to.
Yeah.
That's why I like Joel Klatt, because I don't agree with Joel Klatt a lot. I don't, but I can understand always where he's coming from, and I can always find like, you know what, I disagree with you on this, but okay, I see where you're coming from, right? Like I used to not like Brock Hewitt as an analyst because I thought he's just so really dry. But if you listen to him, if you can get past the dryness and just listen to what he's saying, he's a pretty good color guy. He'll never rise up the ranks because he's just so boring to listen to. Like he doesn't have that presence, right? But he's really informative. I mean, he can really call a game. And that's why when a guy like Tony Romo comes along, and I haven't listened to Romo in a while, so I don't know if he's still good. But when, Aikman, when he came along, because hey, these guys really know the game and they can vocalize it and they can do a good job. And, I think people like that, but it's like, I don't mind listening to somebody that I don't have to agree with you to think you're really good at your job.
Yeah. Isn't it
just
so
having a
bad,
formed
though,
opinion?
Brian? Because I agree that Tony Romo is good. Like I like Tony. Like I think he's informative. I think he brings it from the player perspective, all that type of stuff. It's great. But isn't it so bad? It's like he comes in and he's an actual good commentator, and then all of a sudden everyone's freaking out because it's like, oh my God, someone actually has analysis. Like, wow, they actually know the game. And it's just like, I'm just like, Tony Romo's good and a very good analyst, in my opinion, very good color guy. But it's just like that shouldn't be a surprise that someone got a guy that actually knows the game to call a football game. Like, there shouldn't be a epiphany. Oh my God, we can do this? Wow.
Right. Yeah. It's like you listen to Dan Mullen a couple times on ESPN, and I was like, this dude just does no prep work on the games he's talking about. None. But then you listen to Urban Meyer do stuff, and somebody just said that he was good on his first stint with Fox. I haven't watched Big Noon Kickoff this year. I haven't done it.
Urban's okay, man.
In the past, I liked Urban on Fox because he would like explain things. He'd talk about things. When I haven't watched it this year, but I don't have to agree with Matt Leinart or Reggie Bush or Brady Quinn to say, you know what I like about Big Noon Kickoff, and why I used to watch it again. This year it's just more about schedule. I just haven't had time to watch it. As it's not that I dislike it, but I can disagree with them, but still feel like they've done their homework. Like I disagree with Reggie Bush on a decent amount of stuff last year, but it's like, man, I could sit there and talk ball with Reggie. I could talk ball with Matt Leinart. I could talk ball with Brady Quinn because at least I know that I feel like they've done their homework. I could talk ball with Joel Klatt. I can't talk ball with Colin Cowherd because I feel like he's just throwing bombs about stuff he really doesn't like know what he's talking about. And that's the thing I don't like is I want guys that like agree or disagree. Like when I was young, I love talking politics with people. And I didn't like talking with other people that believed what I believed because that's boring. You're just in a cult at that point in time, right? Like I like talking to people who didn't believe what I believe, and we'd have really good discussions. And at the end, all right, man, hey, I enjoyed the talk. Appreciate you. See you later. Let's do this again sometime. And it's like now it's like you can't do that. You don't believe what I believe. You're an awful person. We can't talk anymore. Or you get the people in politics now. It's like they don't actually want people that know what they're talking about. They want people just throw these horrible, like these bombs at the other side, so I can hate the other side. And it's like this is lazy. This is boring and lazy. And it's come over to sports now, where it's like okay, this is just boring and lazy, and we have to have this, and we have to have that, and it's just like whatever, dude. I don't even care anymore. So I just stopped listening and said, you know what, I'm going to launch my own show and talk about what the heck I want to talk about. And that's what we do. So
and Robert Griffin has really bad puns and bad dad jokes. They're not good.
Oh God,
mine are way better.
Oh yes, it's really bad. Somebody just said I like Sean McDonough calling games. Agree, especially when he gets really excited because he doesn't have a good loud voice. You know what I mean? So like, but no, I think Sean McDonough calls a good game. I do. I'm trying to think of some other guys that I
Someone
like.
just said, I know Pat McAfee's done a little bit of stuff, and I actually like McAfee's analysis, man. He's pretty funny. It's pretty funny to me.
I just can't do it with him. He's too much of a yinzer, man. I just can't. I can't do it. I can't do it, man. I just can't do it.
I like Pat McAfee.
Gosh, I can't do it. I can't do it. Did you see Luke Bryan pick Notre Dame to beat Clemson last week? And did you hear why?
No.
So basically he was saying like a guy he knew that was a Clemson fan never called him back So he's like, forget it. I'm picking Notre Dame. He was the only person to pick Notre Dame. So Luke Bryan picked Notre Dame last week.
Good job, Luke.
Yeah. Yep. So, yeah, I'm just trying to think of some different guys. Like, I don't watch NFL now, so I couldn't tell you who are good play-by-play guys. But I used to listen to Daryl Johnston. I don't know if he's still doing it, but he was pretty good back in the day. Yeah, he was pretty good back in the day. I love Gus Johnson. He makes the game fun. When I listen to basketball, I used to really listen to Kevin Harlan. I thought it was good to listen to do basketball games. I don't know if he's still doing that or not. But I'm trying to think. I think Mike Tirico is phenomenal. I think Mike does a great job calling games. Yeah, I mean, so there's some. I like people that are, and I don't. The thing that bothers me is I think they've gone to too much of the players being color guys and away from coaches that are color guys, or maybe non-athletes that are color guys that know the game. And this push to just you got to have a player. You got to have a player has kind of given us some bad choices. I mean, some guys just aren't good at what they do.
I'll take a player over Jason Garrett, though. So,
I mean, as long as the player knows what he's talking about. I mean, if you traded Robert Griffith III or Greg McElroy for Jason Garrett, hard pass. No thanks. Jason Garrett's pretty boring. He's pretty boring. Somebody says, I like Louis Riddick. I think he does a pretty good job. I've never listened to Louis. I've only listened to him call a game or two. I know of him more doing draft stuff, and I think he does a really good job.
Louis Riddick is a very good draft guy, though. Very good draft guy. Yeah. You know who was terrible? Do you remember when Jason Witten tried to announce?
Oh, no. Didn't they immediately put him on Monday Night Football or something like that?
I forget what the trend was, but he only announced for 1 year, and then he went back to play for the Raiders after that. Yeah. And man, it was just so. Yeah. So I want to talk about stale, boring. Not a very good speaker either. It wasn't very eloquent. It was just bad, man. It was just really, really bad.
Yeah. But see, again, they're in that stretch where they're trying to force players into the booth, right? Yep. That's how we got Booger McFarland. That's why we got Jason Witten. That's why we get, some of the guys we get. It's just stop trying to force former players down our throat. Just because you played the game doesn't mean you know the game better than other people. It really doesn't. And I mean, part of it is because fans want to see famous people, right? I mean, being famous automatically adds a level of credibility to people, which should not exist, to be completely honest with you. It's just because you are physically gifted doesn't mean you're necessarily the smartest guy in the world or good at that, So somebody said Dennis Miller. That was a horrible time in Monday Night Football. I'm sorry. I do not want a comedian in the box either. Give me people that actually know the game of football,
We'll have Tom Brady on the NFL scene soon when he decides to retire.
Yep.
So.
Yep, and when he retires from the NFL in 6 years. Yes. So, yeah. Good Lord. Anyway. All right, man. So that's going to do it. That was a really fun close to the show. Very interesting close to the show. So somebody said excited for Dan Orlovsky tomorrow. What are your thoughts on Dan Orlovsky?
I think Dan's got pretty good analysis when he doesn't try to be the smartest guy in the room. That's what I think. I think that he genuinely knows football pretty well. It's just he tries to be a little over the top and hot takey at times, which I don't like. But
and I think
I could talk ball with him though. I could talk ball with him.
Oh yeah. I think that he tends to be also someone who is unwilling to back off a point that he, you know what I mean? Like, hey, dude, I know you thought this going in, but it's pretty clear now that that's not true. And every now and then when it looks like it is true, don't grab it to hold on to it for the rest of your life to try to prove your point. You know what I mean? It's he will have some stuff. I'm like, oh, that's a really good job. He's doing a really good job. And then I'm like, whoa, hold on. Did he just say what I think he just said? It's like,
when he stays in his comfort zone and he's just reacting to what he sees, I'm like, cool, you're good. You're an eloquent speaker. You see the game in a good way, but it's just he just pulls these takes out sometimes where I'm just like, guy, you're just trying too hard at this point.
That's why I like him better as a color guy than as an analyst on TV.
Agree.
Right. Yeah. Because then he's just he's just kind of sitting there pointing to, hey, this is what I see. And that's hard. Somebody asked me one time, do you think you'd be a good play-by-play guy? I said, eventually I think I could be good at it if I worked at it. But if I were just to jump in the booth right now, heck no, I'd be terrible at it. It's a skill. It's a skill that you got to be. I mean, some people are great at it and some people aren't. And with these former players, you don't just jump into a booth and start calling, doing color games. Like, there's a reason people that do this that aren't former athletes have to work their way up the ranks, because it takes time to really learn and be good at this. And unfortunately, there's too many former players that are just getting thrust up the board because they're names, and they're just not good. Like Drew Brees should not have been thrust into doing Notre Dame games the immediately done playing football. Yep. Like, how about we let him learn a little bit? Let's put him in the studio and give him 5-minute segments every now and then, and let him get used to being in front of a camera and talking about things. So somebody said, what about Beth Mowins? I actually think she does a pretty good job.
I haven't listened enough.
Yeah, she calls games. She's a good play-by-play person. She does a really good job. Doris Burke's one that's for basketball, I think, does an excellent job. And there was another lady that used to do like lower level games, and I can't remember her name was. I thought she did a really good job too, with play-by-play. And she had short hair. Man, I cannot remember her name to save my life. But yeah, I can't remember her. But yeah, I think Beth Mowins does a good job. She does, because the thing is too, she calls the game. She knows what she's talking about. She clearly has done her homework on the teams, and and her delivery is pretty good. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Somebody said Troy Aikman is good, but so dry. I don't think he's dry. Like, I don't need everybody to be Gus Johnson.
Troy's not bad.
Like, yeah,
He's solid.
He's a pretty good job.
It's good.
That's why I liked John Madden growing up, because he would talk about the game. I mean, he had a personality, but he knew what he was talking about too. That's the other thing is, it's like he'd say, "I think this is going to happen," and lo and behold, that's exactly what would happen.
John was a legend.
Yeah, he was. Yep. He was. It was earned. It was earned. So anyway, good conversation. That was a fun way to end the show. Very much, very much. And for the love of God, if you're going to get into TV, go back to being Anthony McFarland. Stop letting people call you Booger. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like when Tommy Reese got named the OC. It's like, it's Tom Reese now. It's like, no, it's not. It's Tommy.
Tom Reese.
But at least Tommy's like a name off Tommy. Like, dude, your name's Booger. Like, it's time to get people to stop.
It's like when Mitch Trubisky came out of college and he's like, no, it's Mitchell. No, it's not.
Mitch. No, it's not. Dude. Yeah, you should have stuck with Mitch, because Mitchell sucks.
That's when I knew he wasn't going to be good. I'm like, oh, he wants to be called Mitchell.
Yeah. Mitch was a pretty good quarterback. Mitchell sucked.
Yes.
So there you go. There you go. So anyway, that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Y'all have a great, great rest of your day. We will be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. to noon. Sean Stiers and Vince D'Addario will be back for the IB countdown to kickoff. They'll preview the Notre Dame game and, of course, all the other big games of the day. Ryan will be driving home from the game tomorrow, because he's covering the game for me tomorrow, which I greatly, greatly appreciate that you're doing that. So Ryan will be in Baltimore at the game tomorrow. And then after the game, so that means our post-game show is going to get started pretty quickly after the game tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that, because we won't have to have anyone driving home to get to doing the thing. Now, the good news is, Ryan, you live close enough to Baltimore, and the way that our shows go, there's a chance
I could jump on it.
You may jump on at the end of the show. I'm just saying. So we shall see. But and then, of course, we'll have an upon further review on Sunday night. So for Ryan, I'm Brian. Everybody have a phenomenal Friday night. There's a lot of Notre Dame commits in action tonight. Ryan has an article on the front page at irishbreakdown.com about all the games tonight, so check that out. Some of the guys are going to be on TV. Sign up for the message boards, everybody. We would really greatly appreciate that. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Make sure you subscribe to CFB Nation on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Sign up to that channel on YouTube. Make sure you're watching those videos to help us grow that channel even more as well. And be good to each other. Enjoy the games tomorrow, and we'll talk to you again very, very soon.